for this session, and these case studies and these different examinations will be interspersed with also taking your questions. So there's a little bit of a lag. There's such a it's kind of weird here with the YouTube streaming, because there's quite a lag between, there's about I don't know, about a minute and a half lag between what you're seeing and what I'm saying. So anyway, that notwithstanding, we should be live now and rolling. And so before I get started with questions, like I said, I'm going to show a couple case studies. On the session this morning or this afternoon, I talked about a lot of fundamentals. I talked about a lot of principles and a lot of basic fundamentals where where on the level of frameworks and structures, and rather than just going to techniques, gravitating toward techniques rather than just gravitating toward techniques, we are then learning the frameworks, learning the structures. That's what I talked about this morning, or in this afternoon session. And in this evening session, I'm going to be showing how those techniques and how those things come to life, or how those principles rather come to life in practice. So again, we're just getting started here, and I'm a little distracted right now because I'm waiting to see that the video started, and it just did, even though it's been going about a minute now probably for you. I just see now that it's going. There's a lag. So anyway, I see that the stream is now rolling, and we're on time here. So again, before I get to a bunch more questions, I'm going to start with showing some of these principles in action. And I have some case studies here that I'm going to show you right now. I want to start with actually, there were several questions about harmonic charts. It's a great thing to be thinking about. It's a great thing to be noticing that astrology is not just about it's not just about one chart. The beauty of Vedic astrology is that we have the Shadashavargas, the 16 harmonic charts, and those 16 harmonic charts really allow us to drill down into and have enormous specificity over predictions and understanding the different areas of life with enormous clarity. So one of the things, one of the things that we do. Someone was asking about when to use the harmonic charts, how to use them, and things like that. And so this is an example I just want to show of. You see there's a picture of a Rashi chart and then of a Dasamsha chart, a D10. Someone asked about the D10 chart. And what the sort of direction that I gave earlier today was, what you want to do is you have to look at the Rashi chart as the sort of aggregates overall like energy and the ratio of what's happening in the person, like the ratio of importance to all of the different things. Like, we have different areas of life. We have relationships, career, children, all of these different parts of us. And the Rashi chart really shows the kind of mix of how important is the career going to be relative to the relationship, to their personal identity, to children, to other things, siblings. You get 5 planets in the 3rd house, and siblings are going to be a big theme in their life. Like maybe arguing with them or having to deal with things in that way, or that kind of sibling energy, for instance. So you would maybe really pay attention to the Drekana chart in that case. Career, of course, is there are really really 3 or 4 main harmonic charts. First of all, the D1 is the most important, like I said, because it shows the ratio. But then, of course, relationships and career, these are the big things that we pay a lot of attention to in life. So you want to kind of see like what's more important, the relationship or the career. They're going to put more importance on one or the other. Are they somewhat evenly balanced? And then you can look in that chart, in that harmonic chart, to really actually see the kind of profession the person would have. And I've been asked a lot, how can you see the profession? Again, it's not that simplistic. People want to say, well, you look at the 10th Lord. I mean, you really look at everything that is related to the career. There are actually 4 main things that you look at for any facet of life. First of all, you look at the karaka, the thing that produces it. Like for career, the main karaka is Saturn, because it shows our willingness to make a commitment to things, work hard, and sacrifice for a goal. That's what makes a career rather than just jobs. What are they willing to make a commitment to and not give up on? That's Saturn energy. The second thing is the house ruler. Versus the karaka, Saturn for career, Venus for relationships, then the house ruler in that chart. Not the house itself, the house ruler. So that would be the 10th Lord in any chart. Next is the house itself, any planets in the house. And then finally is the harmonic chart to really show how the thing works and the specifics of it. There are other things. There are the Jaimini Karakas. There are some other things to also look at for sure, but that's a lot. It is a lot because, again, like I said this morning or earlier today, all of these are very deep principles. The Karaka itself is going to have all kinds of stuff associated with it. The house ruler, all kinds of stuff. The house itself, big thing. The harmonic chart, huge stuff. So we'll look at this chart here. You see it's a Cancer ascendant. So the 10th Lord is Mars, right? The 10th Lord is Mars. You see in this chart, and if it's kind of small on your screen, you can actually click the sort of full screen viewer here, and you can see it in the full screen. You can maximize the player maybe if you want in full screen. So that player in full screen is you'll be able to see the different positions there a little bit better if you can't see it very well. So it's a Cancer ascendant, and the 10th house ruler is Mars. Like I said, Mars goes into Libra with the Sun, Rahu, and Mercury. Now again, these are important principles. Before you even start looking in harmonic charts, you want to understand that Mars, someone might say, oh man, it's joined the Sun, it's joined Rahu, it's joined Mercury, the 12th Lord. That's not good, and like look at things maybe. But again, without understanding it, this Mars is forming a Raja Yoga. It's the 10th Lord in the 4th, but it's also the 5th Lord in the 4th. 5th Lord in the 1st is a trine Lord in an angle. It's also a trine Lord in an angle joined Rahu. So Rahu is in the angle joined the trine Lord. That forms a Raja Yoga with Rahu. So right there, very powerful stuff. The 10th Lord is forming a Raja Yoga with Rahu in the 4th house. And it's with the 12th Lord. And it's also joined the Sun, which is a Dana Yoga. It forms a Dana Yoga because you have the 5th Lord and the 2nd Lord joined, which is a Dana Yoga. Dana means wealth. So it's not only a Raja Yoga in the 4th, it's a Raja Yoga with the 2nd Lord, so it's a Dana Raja Yoga. It's also with the 12th Lord, so you might be like, uh-oh, 12th Lord, problem. It's also Rahu, uh-oh, problem. Instead of realizing that Rahu makes the Raja Yoga much more powerful, because Rahu forms Raja Yogas when it's in an angle with a trine Lord, in a trine with an angle Lord. Here, it fulfills that purpose beautifully. It's in an angle with the trine Lord. Mars is the trine Lord, and Rahu is in the angle with the trine Lord. So what we have here is a powerful Raja Yoga with the 10th Lord and Rahu. It's also with the 12th Lord. So what are things that Rahu and the 12th house and things like that maybe have in common? Well, the 12th house has to do with what? Has to do with prison, has to do with what? hospitals. As far as career goes, these are places where you will find the career with the 12th house. Prison, hospitals, maybe losing money because you got the second lord and the 12th lord joined, which, there's a yoga that says when the second lord and the 12th lord joins, that there's a problem when the second and the 12th lord join, that it takes away our wealth. So when you look in the when you look in the D10, you also see some important trends here. In D10 we have a Taurus ascendant, and again we want to look at the same sort of factors in the D10. You want to look at the 10th lord, first of all the Karaka, which is Saturn. You want to look at the 10th lord, which in this case is also Saturn because Saturn rules Aquarius. Then you want to also look at the 10th house. The person has the sun in the 10th house. So when we look in this chart, do we see power in the career in this chart? Well, again, Saturn forms a Raja Yoga by itself because anytime Saturn is in an angle or a trinal house for a Taurus person, it forms a Raja Yoga because Taurus is the Yoga Karaka planet. The Yoga Karaka planet, which means that it rules an angle in a trine by itself, and so anytime it is in an angle or a trine for Taurus, it forms a Raja Yoga, just like Mars does for Cancer. So very powerful in the D10 as well. So the other thing we have to understand is that the ruler of any chart is like the person in that area of life. So for instance, in the D10, it's a Taurus ascendant, which is ruled by Venus. So in his career, this is a man, in his career, he's like a Venus figure. But Venus goes into the 8th house. So he's a Venus like Taurus figure, which is about what? Comfort, beauty, things like that. Taurus is about, it's actually related to things like hospitality and food and beauty. But his Venus goes into the 8th house. So he's like a Taurus type of figure, but it's an 8th house Taurus type of figure. So what would that mean? Well, I'll tell you what this person does. This person is in the medical profession, and they're an anesthesiologist, which is knock people out before they get operations, make them unconscious before they have an operation. They've been doing it a long time. I think they had the career for more than 20 years, 25, 26 years. So you see this powerful, I didn't mention Ketu is in the 10th house in the Rashi chart as well. So you have the nodal axis right along this whole career, the nodes are in the career axis. Mars, the 10th lord, is with Rahu, again, which is about drugs and knocking and unconsciousness. But it's also about medicine. It's about how drugs can be medicine. Again, it's with the 12th lord. This is in the Rashi chart now. The 12th lord, which is hospitals. It's also unconsciousness. It's about sleep, putting people to sleep. This person puts people to sleep professionally. Been doing it for a long time. So you can see this in the Rashi chart for sure. Like I said, most of the time you can really get most of what you need from the Rashi chart, like in general. What you then do in the D10 is you can actually see the specifics of the thing. Like for instance, you see the power and the potential and the ratio of importance of the thing in the Rashi chart. You see he's going to have a powerful career. He's going to make a commitment to it. He's going to work hard. It's going to be a solid structure because of those Raja Yogas in the 4th house. Again, all of it is shown. It's with the 12th lord, which has to do with hospitals, with unconsciousness. It's with Rahu, which has to do with drugs and unconsciousness, drugging people. You see that, but then, that's like the kind of overall energy of what the person goes into. And then you see him in the career in the D10, but he's providing comfort. It's not like he's a drug dealer. You might see similar things for a drug dealer, though. Mars, Rahu, like let's say if it wasn't a Cancer ascendant, let's say it was maybe a Pisces ascendant, and you had all those planets in the 8th house, Mars, Sun, Rahu, Mercury in the 8th house. The person might be a drug dealer. Maybe someone born, 8 hours earlier was maybe a drug dealer. Mars, Sun, Rahu, Mercury in the 8th. Because the difference is, with this Cancer ascendant, all those planets in the 4th house are forming Raja Yogas. Raja Yogas are what stabilize things. This is why everything is about house rulerships and the time a person is born and the nature of these planets relative to the houses they rule and the ascendant. This is why I wrote a book called The Ascendant. This is like, you got to know this. I mean, you just got to know this, or you simply can't do astrology. You're not going to be able to understand Vedic astrology. You simply can't. This is how it works. And so again, when questions come, what does it mean when I have this here? It's the difference, but the questions, the way they land in my mind is it so much depends. It's like you could have a 26-year profession where you make good money and help people, or you could be a drug dealer in and out of prison. That's the range of potential when you just get like one nugget or two nuggets. When someone doesn't know the ascendant, they don't know the rising sign. Not to mention if we don't know the dashas, we don't know what dashas are unfolding, we don't know where the moon is, we don't know when the dasha cycle started. All that's incredibly important. You don't know the harmonic charts. Again, all that's really important. So you can see that in his D10, you take that power from the Rashi chart, all that potential for all of that potential to contribute and make a difference and benefit people and have a stable career where he can make a good living, and all of that potential is really made much more specific in the harmonic chart. And you can see the specifics of why he is a Taurus type figure, comforting others. And again, here you see Venus goes into the 8th house. 8th house has to do with things like hypnosis, literally, like we said earlier, like facing our fears. That has to do with death. And, anesthesia, although it's pretty safe these days, it can be a dangerous thing. You could maybe not wake up. You're kind of putting someone in a sort of state of suspended animation or something. I mean, people don't wake up from anesthesia sometimes, so you're kind of killing them a little bit. I mean, you have to monitor the vital signs and stuff. It's something that 100 years ago would have been pretty amazing. That okay, we're going to make this person completely unconscious, not feel anything, but not kill them. The person looks like they're dead. So it's a healthy quality, the 8th house. But you see, he's Venus type of person, but he's Venus in the 8th, which is putting people in that kind of nether world state. And again, you see that same kind of moksha, kind of liberation theme affirmed by having Mars, Rahu join Mercury in the Rashi chart, the 12th lord. You look and see in his D10, he's got Moon and Mercury in the 12th house in the D10 chart. So the Moon is in the 12th, Mercury is in the 12th. Again, this theme of sort of putting people to sleep. But look at the Raja Yogas, especially in the 9th house. You say, oh, Jupiter's debilitated in the D10. So what? I mean, I don't mean to be droll, but this is a D10 chart. This is the harmonic chart. And you don't understand. I have to tell you how many times someone will, something like this, and someone will be like, often it's like a parent worrying about their son. What's going to happen? He's got Jupiter debilitated in his D10. And I'll see it something like this. It's like, so not a big deal. First of all, the D10 is a chart of career. Now, of course, when the person runs the dasha of Jupiter and the subcycle of Jupiter, there's all kinds of ways to look at this. Don't get me wrong. It's not like it doesn't have an effect. It does have an effect. But as far as bringing success, this Jupiter is also, it's still aspecting the ascendant. Jupiter aspect is still Jupiter aspect. It's still bringing a certain amount of grace onto the ascendant. It's also, in this case, joined its ruler, Saturn, so there's a lot going on here. So just in general, this is a kind of, general way to look at harmonic charts in the sense of, how to how to how to really manage them. And so that's a general sort of way to look at that sort of ratio of effect, what's shown in the Rashi chart, and how it translates into the harmonic chart. You can see that here. You can see it in different ways. This is the overall potential to have a solid, stable career for a long time. And this kind of, working in hospitals with the 12th Lord. And this, this whole approach to being a comfort, a caregiver, comfort giver. He's still comforting people with the Taurus rising sign. And have another chart here. This is another harmonic chart comparison here I have of. This is another way to really look at harmonic charts that is important. You want to also be able to compare the different areas of life, the relationships and the career. Here I have a D9 chart and a D10 chart. As you see, the other one you saw was Raquel Welch, which we'll talk about her in a minute at some point. But this harmonic chart comparison you see between the D9 and the D10. And again, if you want to see this in, if it's a little small, then you can just, make the screen a little bigger. But you look at the difference between these two charts. Like, for instance, how much joy a person is going to get from these different areas of life. This is something that you can just generally look at. You can just generally look at how much a person is going to enjoy areas of life by the qualities of the harmonic charts. And as you see in the one chart here, in the Navamsha chart, you have a Scorpio ascendant. Again, it all comes down to being able to read the chart properly, but you have a Scorpio ascendant, you have Mars and the Moon in the 6th house. Mars is the ruling planet. And it's in the 6th house, which is a difficult house, with the Moon. So you have Mars, Moon in the 6th house. Sorry, I was just looking at something here. And then you have Jupiter and Ketu in the 8th house. Jupiter is the 5th house ruler. It's with Ketu in the 8th house. Now again, a basic principle of really understanding astrology well is knowing the nature of the houses, like I just said. And for every sign, really the most important planets are the Dharma lords, which means the planets that rule houses 1, 5, and 9. Planets that rule houses 1, 5, and 9 are the ones that bring intelligence, fulfillment. For Scorpio, it's Mars, Jupiter, and the Moon. First house is Dharma because it's our truthful intelligence and truthful identity. Not the ego, but the true self we're trying to express as an individual in this lifetime. not the ego, but what feels natural to us. The fifth house ruler and the fifth house is about creativity. The joy that comes from being creative. Of course, we can say children, but that's what children are. It's like our heart's desire. And then the ninth house is our highest teachings and wisdom, and that comes in the form of gurus and things like that. So the rulers of houses 1, 5, and 9 in any chart at any time are really the ones that we look at, that we look for to bring the intelligence and the wisdom and the beauty of life. Those are the house rulers. And so when you see in this harmonic chart, in the ninth harmonic chart, Moon and Mars, these two Dharma lords, are in the sixth house, which just shows a lot of effort. Like, relationships just feel like a lot of work to this person, just a lot of effort. Sixth house is all the uncomfortable, unpleasant, hard work of life. So the ruling planet and the moon are there in the sixth house. And then Jupiter, which is the feeling of creative bliss and joy, is in the eighth house with Ketu. So you can just sense right away that in general, relationships are going to feel kind of stressful to this person at the very least. Now they also have Venus, the Karaka, and the seventh house ruler in this Navamsha goes into the ninth house, so there is a sense of hope. It gives this person a sense of hope that, okay, well, I'm still looking for it. I'm still inspired to try to find relationship, because you need to look at the Karaka, like I said before, and it's Venus in the D9, and also the seventh house ruler, if it's relationships. And again, for Venus, it's also Venus because it's the seventh house ruler. So Venus is a Karaka and the seventh house ruler, and it's in the ninth house, that house of hope. So there is hope. But then, it feels like so much work, and it just doesn't feel so good. So you compare that D9 with the D10, which is this person's career chart. Look at the career chart. We have a Leo ascendant, Leo rising sign, ruled by the sun. The sun is in the fifth house. Already, that feels good. The ruling planet in the fifth house is like, I feel creative, I feel inspired. This is like my baby, right? We got Jupiter in the seventh house, aspecting the first house. Jupiter is the fifth lord in the seventh house. Again, these are what are called Raja Yogas. You cannot begin to do astrology well unless you understand. The sun is the first lord in the fifth, which is an angle lord in a trine. It's a Raja Yoga. Jupiter is an angle lord and is a trine lord in an angle. The fifth lord in the seventh, a Raja Yoga. Right away, the Lagna lord and Jupiter are in Raja Yogas. A Raja Yoga aspecting the ascendant. The Lagna lord, the ascendant lord in the D10, is forming a Raja Yoga with Mercury, which has to do with skill and intelligence, fulfillment in the fifth house. So this person in her career is incredibly creative, and they get so much fulfillment out of it. She's got the moon in the ninth house. It's a 12th lord in the ninth, but this person teaches and studies. This person's mainly a teacher. You see with that Jupiter aspecting the ascendant. Again, we're reading the career based on this D10. First of all, it's a Leo ascendant, which is like ready to stand. It's a Leo ascendant, so the person is ready to stand like steadfast in power. They're ready to stand steadfast in the power with that Leo ascendant. And then Jupiter is aspecting the ascendant, so it's like inspired teaching. They have the moon in the ninth house. The moon is the mind. It goes into the ninth house, which is about leadership and teaching. That sun Mercury was in the fifth house, which again, just very powerful. And compared to the D9, where all of that energy is hung up in these difficult houses, you can see for sure that this person is just going to enjoy career a lot more than they're going to enjoy relationships. Just comparing the harmonic charts this way. This is the kind of, at least like, initiation, like this is like the initial kind of examination that you want to be able to perform when you look in the harmonic charts. So you want to be able to perform that kind of examination where you can assess like the relative strength and ease and expression of joy in the harmonic charts in general. Comparing one to the other, then that gets filtered through like the ratio of importance that I just talked about a little bit earlier, like with this, like with the, what's going on here? Like with the first chart that we looked at, like with this chart, we would, we would have looked at the ratio of importance between the career and the relationship. Like, let's say, for instance, in this person, in fact, in this person's natal chart, there's a lot more power toward the career, so it's harmonious with her harmonic charts as well, because she gets a lot more fulfillment out of her career in the Rashi chart as well. You can see it. But sometimes you'll see where, let's say, this person maybe has a lot of focus on relationships, much more so than her career from the Rashi chart. Like, let's say we would see in the Rashi chart that she's got all this energy in relationships, as an example, and not a lot of energy in the career. Like, it's not as important to her. Like, let's say the first house ruler was in the 7th with Venus, or something where you could tell this person really put a lot of importance on their relationships, but the career they didn't really care that much about. Let's say you had that in the Rashi chart, and then in the birth, and then in the harmonic charts, you had something like this, where it's backwards, where this person puts a lot of attention on her relationships, but her Navamsha chart looks like this D9, and they don't put a lot of importance on their career. It's not that important to them. It's not as important as their relationships, yet they have this strong D10. This is also where you see people in these, sort of conflicts where they have this great partner and this, something like that, but maybe, they just kind of don't appreciate it or something like that. And this happens, where people will, have this great thing in life, but they don't really appreciate it so much because maybe that's just not their focus, and you get this overall ratio of understanding this way. And again, this really implies a lot of knowledge, a lot of backstory, a lot of things that you have to study first in order to be able to make those evaluations. The dignity of the planets as the house rulers, what's showing the Raja Yogas. You need to be able to evaluate all of those things, and then once you can, then you take that and you bring it into the harmonic charts. Now, one of the things also I mentioned in the session earlier today is we really shouldn't even start looking at harmonic charts with a lot of focus until we can, like, let's say, rectify down to the rectify down to the proper ascendant in each harmonic chart. That's really one of the first functions of being able to use the harmonic charts. Before you even start reading them like I just did, well, actually, you can be doing it simultaneous, I guess, but one of the main first, uses of the harmonic chart is to be able to drill down specifically to get the right birth time. And you need to be able to know that the life events are lining up with the harmonic charts. This is how you rectify. This is how you rectify down to where people, because not most of the time, but certainly a lot of the time, if not most of the time, people will say, that they were born at, 12 noon or, 2 o'clock, right on the dot, and hardly anyone was born right on the dot. It's somewhere around there. And if people are asking specific questions, really specific questions, and you need to understand then you have to be able to get down to that micro level in the harmonic chart. Otherwise, obviously, you can't figure out what's going on. And all of these indications are dasha dependent. So all of these things are going to get activated, like in Mars dasha. Like I said earlier, the ninth harmonic chart in her Mars dasha is going to be really powerful because Mars rules the D9. Whether she likes it or not, Mars dasha is going to activate this harmonic chart. Anytime the Karaka runs, Venus, Mars dasha or subdasha, Venus dasha or subdasha, because Venus is the Karaka of the D9. Again, this is just another principle. Any dasha or sub-cycle that you're running, you want to look in the harmonic chart that planet rules. Jupiter rules the D5. It's not just about children. I mean the D7. It's not just about children. It's about creativity. Saturn rules the D10. Venus rules the D9. Mars rules the Dracana. So whatever harmonic chart the planet rules as a Karaka, or anytime the planet rules the ascendant, or anytime the planet rules like the 10th house in the D10, the 7th house in the D9, whatever it is, you always need to be checking the harmonic charts for any real active principle. So I'm glad to have had that question earlier today. It's a really important one. You're not doing Vedic astrology really very well, and certainly not with a lot of completeness if you're not using the harmonic charts. And knowing how to use them, again, it's not just a simplistic, well, do you check this or do you check that kind of thing. It's, which is more important? And these are often the way the questions are asked. Nothing is more important than anything else. Everything has a place that it fits. Sometimes, again, it's very easy if we don't have enough discrimination to say, well, I think it's more important because when I see charts, this person does more what's in the harmonic chart than they did here. It's going to fall in the parameters that I just mentioned. You're going to have to see the potential from the Rashi chart. It might seem like that potential, though, gets more amplified in the harmonic chart, and it can happen like that. It can look like that. But the important thing is to understand why and what you're looking at. Understand this, understand this subtlety, because the important, the brilliance is in the subtlety. The brilliance is in all of that subtlety and all of that nuance. All of that nuance, which doesn't happen when you just, when you just look at it simplistically. So, take a few questions here. Well, someone asked about kids committing suicide. I'm not really sure what to say about that, Carol. It's sad. I'm sorry to hear it. Seems all the reported suicides, it's getting worse. Why are our kids abusing each other? Will it continue to get worse? Will we see an end? I'm not sure. That's an astrology question, really. I'm sorry. I'm just not sure what to say to that. I'm sorry if your life is touched by that. So someone asked, first I'll just say, Wendy, I don't really want to talk about our certification lessons here. Wendy's in my level 2 certification and asked me if I'd talk about our assignment in this week, level 2, and a person's chart. So I'm not sure I want to really talk about that, first of all, because it's homework that you need to do. You need to do it. Anyway, so Janet Cook said, planets, polarities, oppositions, and oppositions, sun sign and ascendant, do they just cancel each other out? Well, that's a good question. Hang on a second. I talked a lot about oppositions in the first session today when I was talking about the sun and the moon, new moons and full moons, and eclipses. Nothing cancels anything. what happens is we try to simplify something because it's complicated. So we take something complicated like planet polarities, oppositions, and say, well, it's half this, half that, so it's very complicated, so does it just cancel it all out? I'm not even sure what that would look like. How could you cancel the sun or the ascendant? They're there. They're activating forces, and no. The best way to look at anything like this where we're tempted to turn something into an oversimplification is to understand that everything is added. Everything is added. A good example is if you're making a soup, if you're making soup, let's say, and you add a bunch of ingredients. Let's say you add salt and you add pepper. Well, does the salt cancel the pepper? Or let's say something opposite, like salt and sugar. They're kind of opposite. It's like, well, there's salt and there's sugar, so do they cancel each other out? You see? No. You taste them both. Nothing's canceled. Everything is added, and it adds complexity. And it's complex. And you can explain it if you understand the astrology properly. You just explain that. You have to explain and understand that whole kind of concept of, we're always trying to integrate our opposite, whether it's in relationships or anything else. The opposite is a mirror reflection. It's not really opposite, it's a reflection. It's interesting to ponder things like the shadow by Jung and all of that. It's really kind of that shadow side where we kind of reject that other thing and say, no, it's this 100%, when actually this is maybe 50% at the most. In contrast to the opposite, it's 50%. It's like saying you have two people in a relationship. Do they cancel each other out? Probably not. At some point, maybe their dynamic as they're working through stuff will cancel out the ego a little bit, and they can reach something called a relationship, which has less of their own individual will and more of the thing called the relationship, which is a kind of third entity. But no, it's not canceled out. Oppositions really contain the other in it. One of the things about oppositions is they share a lot with the thing they're opposite of. They have the same seed principle. And finding that common denominator is important in uniting the split of oppositions. Again, you could say this about life in general, and astrology, of course, is going to show it. Just like in a relationship, for instance, that's the easiest way to put it, because we're looking at our opposite in the relationship. But if people can't find common ground, then it's a problem, right? If you would put this in astrological language, let's say you have a Taurus and a Scorpio. Well, they're opposites and they just have nothing in common. Not at all. They have mostly everything in common, actually. The opposition is the same element, for instance. I'm sorry, not the same element, the same modality. They're both feminine or both masculine. Usually, the planetary rulers are either inimical or neutral toward each other, but they will share the same modality as well. So they share the same gender and the same modality, which means they're both fixed, cardinal, or mutable, and they're both feminine or masculine. And again, these can be sticking points, but there's also a lot of complementary angles in there, like Taurus Scorpio, for instance. Underneath it all, they both want the same thing. They both want, it's really the security insecurity axis. Scorpio underneath it all just wants to be safe and secure, but they have to go through a lot in order to get it. Taurus also wants to be safe and secure, but they also want excitement and passion, but they're just a little bit too stuck in their, hanging on to what they have and afraid of risking it to let it go. So they really complement each other, even though they come at it a little bit differently. Virgo, Pisces, they're really quite similar in a lot of ways, even though they express it in an in an opposite way. They're both feminine, they're both dual, they're both about wanting some kind of freedom to move, and also, but they're very they both have a lot of devotion. They do it in a different way. One is more intellectual, the other one's more abstract. Again, it's just uniting the issues between the planetary rulers. With Scorpio Taurus, it's a Mars-Venus problem. With Pisces Virgo, it's a Mercury-Jupiter thing. One's in the head, one is inspired and belief-oriented, the other one is intellectual. So, like everything, you have to go to the you have to go to the rulers, the planets. They rule everything. So, with every opposition, you have to go back to the planets themselves and get into their nature. And nothing's ever canceled out in any situation. Everything is added. So Jennifer Perez said something about foot fungus because of the example that I used. So that was nice of you to post a remedy for foot fungus. Sending you good energy. Okay, thanks for that. I'm just a beginner. I've been studying the basics of planets and houses. I'm starting to work on the signs and conjunctions and aspects. What else when you first start off? Well, you want to study the frameworks and the principles, like I said. Preferably, you want to find a teacher that you really relate to, and make it simple for yourself in the beginning. Not sure what you're studying or who you're studying with, but for instance, I have a beginning class that I taught several years ago, which is a very strong foundational course that starts with planet signs, houses, all the elements, the Indian structures and stuff that I'm talking about. That's less than $50, and it's a great way. It's like close to 30 hours of recordings for about $50. So you can't beat that. If you're interested in that, let me know. But in general, you want to be careful, just like cherry picking and pulling this into that. I'm not saying you're doing that, but a lot of the kind of internet study these days, I mean, it's great. The internet is great with exposing this information, exposing a lot of people to the information, but it's also very easy to, fall into that illusion of understanding that comes with the internet as well. And the illusion of understanding is that, just learning things on the surface and thinking that there's deep comprehension. We're all programmed and wired to do this. I did a whole thing on this a few years ago. I've studied a lot of cognitive behavior and cognitive biases and behavioral sort of psychology and all these kinds of things, and studied learning, and I put a lot of time into studying those things and how to teach and how to learn and how the brain works and stuff. And one of the things, part of the brain is really wired to get it. And I kind of have this whole thing where I've noticed so much, like, rather than keep learning, it's almost like our brain is wired, instead of to keep learning, our brain is wired to hurry up and get it. Like, okay, I got it. Now the next thing. Okay, I got that. Now this. And in this, like, desire to keep, like, it's actually very Rahu-like. This is the nature of Rahu. This is the nature of the mind that's like Rahu, which just wants to keep, like, voraciously eating more and more stuff and not really digesting it, because Rahu is cut off from the rest of the organism. It's cut off at the head, and that's where all the digestive organs are and where the heart is, where we integrate things through patience and solitude and whatnot. So, Vedic astrology is something that it requires practice, it requires principle, it requires research, and especially in the beginning, it's very easy, especially if someone doesn't have any connection with Indian understanding, Indian frameworks. It's very easy. What most people do is they've studied a little bit of Western astrology, or they studied some Western, and then they're like, okay, now I'm going to study Vedic, and they're like pulling all of that, which is a whole different. I mean, it's the same language, but it just works differently. It's all about house rulerships, and then we haven't even talked about nakshatras, which I'm going to talk about in this session as well. But you really, first of all, to do Vedic astrology, you have to understand something about Indian energetics. You need to understand something about Sanatana Dharma and meditation and yoga and these principles, these concepts. Otherwise, all of the language is going to seem strange. All of it's going to sound like a Western concept, like when someone says it's malefic or benefic or this or that. We're going to bring this Western judgmental mindset into it and just sort of crud the whole thing up, instead of understanding the language they use and what they were trying to convey, and that underneath it all, these are Eastern concepts. And so everything is oriented towards spiritual growth, spiritual development, and identifying different qualities of that doesn't mean that it's not still a divine evolutionary force. It just means it has a certain energy. To say that Saturn is malefic or cruel doesn't mean it's, quote, bad. It's not bad. Cruel and malefic doesn't mean bad. It means sometimes we need to act with cruelty to like protect ourselves from something, or there's a whole range of language that's very different. So, I don't know what you're studying, but just you want to make sure that you have some, that you're not just grasping at a lot of things and being surrounded by a lot of smoke and not a lot of fire. It's one of the things that I kind of say. It's sort of like the noise to signal ratio is not so high often on the internet. There's a lot of noise and not a lot of signal can get through sometime. There's a lot of smoke and not always a lot of fire. Like a lot of, what's this all about? Oh, I know this. And not a lot of like here's the thing going on. Like the fire, which really delineates what's happening. So I really honor your studies there, Eric. And, if I can be of service anymore with what I do, let me know. And again, I'll just say that I am offering some specials on my book. Anyone who wants to get my book, I have, if you want to donate and get an advanced copy of my book, or get my book when it comes out, you'll get a lot of bonuses with the $49 gift. I'm also going to send you this retrograde planets, Mercury and Mars course that I taught. It's actually 6 hours of classes on retrograde planets, Mercury and his signs, Mars and his signs. I have a URL, samsnextbook.com, or you can click the link there and get the book with a $49 gift. I'll send you that as well. And then if you wanted to get a $97 gift, I'll send you all of that and all of the other things that you get that are shown at the Indiegogo page. But you also, I'll send you this course on retrograde planets, and it's the most comprehensive course on retrograde planets I'm sure that's ever been done. I mean, I talk about every planet for every ascendant. Like I said, even when we talk about a retrograde planet, like I have Jupiter retrograde, what does that mean? Again, I can say a couple things, because retrograde is going to interrupt the planet as a karaka, but Jupiter rules different houses depending on the ascendant. Jupiter's in a certain house. All of these things matter. So in my course, I break down every planet for every ascendant. So any retrograde planets that you have in your chart would be covered. Because if it's Mercury retrograde and you're, Cancer, it's going to be different. It's the 3rd and 12th Lord retrograde. If it's Capricorn, it's the 6th and 9th Lord retrograde. Or whatever. So I break all that down. Then I also talk about the houses. I also talk about by transit and all kinds of stuff. So it's 8 to 10 hours, and I have a lot of case studies as well. So I'll just give you that for free if you want to donate $97. You also get listed in the book and a lot of other things if you wanted to also get my book. So that's part of what I'm doing here. So I'm looking to see what else is going on here. So Gigi said she's asking about the harmonic charts. Yeah, they're different ascendants. Yeah, because they're created from different composites of the signs. So the D9 is when you break when you break each sign up into 9 different sections. So when you break each sign up into 9 different sections, then you draw a chart for that. That's the D9. And the D10 is you break it up into 10 sections. So each sign is 30 degrees. So we use the harmonic charts to really rectify the birth time as well, because the karmas have to unfold in accordance with how the harmonic charts are laid out. And so they're great tools for rectification to get the time correct, rather than these times that often come out of hospitals, which is like right on the 10 minutes or 15 minutes or right on the hour or half hour. So we use the harmonic charts, we can rectify and get closer. So Christina Skaggs said, hey Sam, would you please explain the Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga and also Padas? So Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga sounds like Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga. Sounds like, I'm not sure I know of that one specifically. It sounds like you've done your homework there, Christina Skaggs Chambers. Good for you. Sounds like someone doing Japa, going into Dhyana, and then Samadhi. Not sure. There are a lot of liberation yogas. There are also sannyasa yogas. So Japa is more related to the second house. Dhyana and Samadhi are really related to moksha houses. So one of the things is these yogas, like that have these names. Parashara, in Brihat Parashara, there are several, there are chapters on the named yogas. I'm not sure I've seen that one named, but for the most part, this is, yogas are really just a joining of house rulers in different houses, and especially in the classic, in the medieval texts, like in Pali Deepika and some of the other medieval texts, there's a lot of yogas like this that are called certain names with endless permutations, like, maybe for Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga, it would be something like, if the second lord is in the 8th with the 12th lord and Jupiter, it's called a Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga, because it's just taking those components and putting them where they would be and then calling them that. For instance, I don't know what that yoga is, but there's so many yogas with those kinds of names that they're not doing anything except affirming what we know when we learn the principles. Once you learn the principles, like how the astrology works based on the house rulerships and the Dharma house rulers and the power of the different houses, like the 8th house or the 12th house, and getting a Dharma lord, let's say in Ketu in the 12th with, the second lord or something, then you would maybe see that, then you're going to see you'll see that power that is contained in what they would be calling a Japa Dhyana Samadhi Yoga. What I mean to say is that it's a mistake. I don't want to say it's a mistake, because people can do whatever they want, but it's a very hard road to try to memorize endless named yogas like that, instead of learning the principles that show a person who will have that kind of what you might call mantra siddhi, power of mantra, to create dhyana and samadhi. It's much easier to learn the principles and then see that, rather than trying to memorize, okay, what was that again? Okay, second and 9th lord in the 12th with Ketu and Jupiter in the 8th in the Navamsha, aspected by Mars. Okay, that's the one. Do I see that? This is just this is how what happened with a lot of these kind of named yogas, these kind of permutation yogas. And I don't really know this one, so it might be in Parashara. I haven't read every single thing, no one has, but the thing that would happen is often the astrologers of their day would see these, they're doing research, they would see someone who maybe had this amazing mantra siddhi, this amazing to concentrate and go into samadhi through the power of mantra, and they looked and they said, if you see this, it shows that. And they would write it down. And these are a lot of the books, especially from the medieval times, or a certain amount of the material that got into a lot of the classics that aren't Parashara or Jaimini, which are really the two main texts. Even in what we call Parashara, there are sections in Brihad Parashara Horasastra, which it's really kind of, I don't really know, but it's kind of suspect. There's entire chapters in Parashara that has those kinds of permutation yogas, those kinds of things in it, and it reads very different than the rest of Parashara. The rest of Parashara is rules. They're rules and structures and frameworks, not extrapolating techniques telling you how to, like, if you see this yoga, it means this. The point is, if you learn all of those frameworks and you learn how everything works, you don't need to try to memorize all of these yogas. Many times, and again, we got to remember, in the Dark Ages especially, at a certain point, they didn't have the benefit of the things we have the benefit of now. They didn't have Parashara, they didn't even have computers. It's most likely that Brihad Parashara was lost for thousands of years. And so a lot of the precision, especially in medieval times, sort of left, especially with the techniques. Now, they still know how to draw up the chart, and they still know all that because that's the astronomy, and they still use the zodiacs the way they still use sidereal zodiac and all of that. But a lot of the precision, especially with things like, all of the elegant frameworks and precision that comes from, certain qualities. Like, for instance, the planets as house rulers. The Yoga Karakas chapter in Brihad Parashara is incredibly important. It's the one that lays out all the Raja Yogas for, like, Rahu and Ketu, angles and trine lords forming Raja Yogas, all of the nature of the planets as house rulers. All of that most of that, a lot of that, it was lost by the time we got to Paladipika, because Paladipika, the author of that, Mantreshwara, says a lot of different things that are in conflict with Brihad Parashara, especially about the planets as house rulers. Mantreshwara says that you use the dominant bhava of a planet is the Mula Trikona, which is directly in contrast to what's in Brihad Parashara. Parashara has an entire formula to determine what's the dominant bhava for any house lord. Which means to say, like, for instance, for Leo ascendant, Jupiter rules the 5th and the 8th house. Okay? In Paladipika, Mantreshwara would say, well, Jupiter is primarily the 5th house ruler because the Mula Trikona is Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is stronger than Pisces. This is just extrapolated. It's not backed up in Parashara, and it really even doesn't make sense when you look at Parashara. Parashara gives you clear rules. He says the 8th lord is dominant to the 5th. 8th house is dominant to the 5th. 8th house is a stronger house ruler than the 5th, per the rules in Parashara. So no sign is stronger than any other sign. So again, because it's something that sounds good, this is my feeling, a lot of people use that principle. It comes from Paladipika. It's in Paladipika. But Paladipika was written, like in the height of the Dark Ages. I mean, literally, even in the West. I believe it was like around 800 AD or something like that. Brihad Jataka was written 400 AD. And Paladipika was a few hundred years later. I'm not exactly sure exactly when, but it was a few hundred years later. And again, things started to degrade a little bit. Although there's a lot of interesting stuff in those texts, and it's a lot of good stuff. But it also has a lot of those permutation yogas. Like a Japa Dhyana Samadhi or something like that, which is fine. But when you start to see it conflict with Parashara, then I go back to Parashara, because Parashara is the only text that has all of these frameworks in it. You don't have all those frameworks in Paladipika. He didn't have Parashara that we have now. He didn't have that text. So that's as an example. So it's a good question there, Christina, and I was just joking when I said, sounds like you studied your Sanskrit and all, and it's great. I mean, I think it's great that people learn these kind of yogas. I mentioned earlier that I kind of once I started to just really drill down into the frameworks, and these frameworks aren't just astrological, they're Indian. They have to do with yoga, they have to do with, they have to do with universal principles. I stopped really chasing a lot of, these sort of permutations, these things that are extrapolated from different texts. That's kind of what I would call sort of like an extrapolation from those older texts. And so that's what I would say about that. And so, all right, so I'm looking at it. There's a lot of questions. I'm trying to get to as many of them as I can right now. And there's like several different windows as well. So I'm going to go back to the first YouTube channel where people had questions they were asking me on that channel. So I see the polarities thing. Love your work. Keep it up. Thank you. Any real difference between tropical and sidereal zodiac? Yeah, I mean, sidereal zodiac, there's no basis for the tropical zodiac in Vedic astrology. The difference is, yeah, one is based on the seasons, Earth going around the sun. The other is based on the stars. So Parashara is clear about sidereal zodiac. He says right at the beginning, the planets move through the nakshatras and the rashis occupy the same space. Then when he talks about the rashis, he says rashis begin with Mesha forward. He doesn't say the rashis begin with the vernal equinox. It's very clear. And all the rishis, all the practices of Vedic astrology were using sidereal zodiac. It's also obviously the one that's harmonious with the nakshatras. And so this also brings into question the Navamsha charts and the nakshatra padas lining up with the rashis. So, Vedic astrology uses the sidereal zodiac. And by the way, Western astrology, when it was developed and when it was devised back at the same time that we started seeing a lot of the Vedic astrology texts coming about, also the two zodiacs lined up at that time. And Ptolemy also talked about the fixed stars being where they are, who was the ancient Greek astrologer that brought forth Western astrology and first formalized it. So sidereal zodiac is really the one that all of the Vedic methods were using. And that's really not even up for debate, because at the time these methods came about, the zodiacs were pretty much lined up. Parashara tells you clearly that that's the way the sky works. That's the way the zodiacs work. It's backed up by Varaha Mihira in Brihat Jataka and Brihat Samhita. They were aware of the precession, and they put nakshatras and rashis at the same point. Simple. So I see someone says, since Rahu is currently in Libra with Saturn, it's a time this person will learn their Rahu lessons. Came across an interesting chart that may have some trouble understanding. Rahu in ascendant, Venus, Sun, Ketu in Aries. Mars is in his 10th, Moon is in his 12th, and Jupiter in 9th. Okay, so, it's a whole reading. I'm not sure. And you said, since Rahu is in Libra, is this time this person going to learn their Rahu lessons? How will one deal with Rahu in ascendant and Ketu next to the Sun? Again, it's a lot to ask or to answer. Rahu in ascendant, I guess you mean by transit, or? Yeah, so you're not so clear. So I'm not sure. Rahu is the ascending node, which accelerates our karmas a lot. When it's related to the first house, it's accelerating our identity. I've done a whole series on Rahu and Ketu, which I'm continuing, but one of them is Rahu in the first house, Ketu in the 7th. So I'm going to be releasing the rest of those videos here real soon. I've gotten very busy. I have 2 levels of certification going and all kinds of stuff, so I try to keep up with giving out as much free stuff as I can. I have those videos already recorded, but Rahu in the first house is really about our identity and defining our identity on our own terms. Hang on a second. This is the stuff, baby. This is it. Just makes the teeth green. But it's got so much nutrition. So, one second. Sorry about that, but need to do it. Need some vitamins for the brain here, just talking incessantly. So, Rahu in the first is going to accelerate the identity. Understand something, the first house is not the ego. The ego is the third house. First house is our truthful identity, which is based on our experience, again, through the body. You want to understand the seed principle of every house. I'll just say this again, not to sound like a broken record, but so often we pull a couple adjectives. First house, body, self, and then we usually throw ego in there also, which it's not. Ego is the third house, personal desire, which is the sense of separateness, that I want this for me. First house is the truth of our experience, the truth of who we are, based on what we've experienced. Think about that concept and see how that's different than what I want for me. What I want for me is third house, and that's not necessarily bad either. The animal trying to survive and get what it wants is the third house. That's the ego. Okay? The truth of who I am based on what I've experienced and based on what I do is the first house. So it's the truth of our experience, our true identity, based on what we've done. And what we've experienced it through the body-mind complex, our presence. So that's the first house, presence. It's a really good word. So Rahu in the first, and the person just wants to define themselves and define their identity on their own terms. Anytime someone else identifies them, says, oh, you're just like this, Ketu in the seventh rejects it. It can have this very rejecting attitude wherever Ketu is. So that's Rahu in the first, in general. If it's by transit, it's going to bring that energy. If it's in the natal chart, it's going to just be a quality of who the person is. That's very much how you want to look at the difference between transits and something in the ascendant. Or even like if they're running the dasha or something. You know, the dasha is that time that thing is happening. When a planet goes in someone's first house, though, by transit, like if someone has a Libra rising sign, then right now, Rahu is in their first house. So they're developed, so this is what's happening. They're developing that identity right now. And they're trying to define themselves on their own terms. And they're probably kind of rejecting of what others are saying about them. And they're like, I need to figure it out for myself. And again, how this is going to happen for that individual with Rahu going through their first house is going to have a lot to do with, number one, how Rahu is in their natal chart. What is their relationship with Rahu? And number two, what are their dashas? What are all those factors that are going on? Is it going over any other planets? What houses do those planets rule? What are the karakas of those planets? All that stuff. Nothing is simple. It's all complex. And the real skill of an astrologer is actually to find the most important thing and do that, because it's very easy to go down a bunch of rabbit holes and get caught in a maze and just start saying a whole bunch of things that aren't relevant. So again, understanding the structure and the frameworks help organize all of that. And what happens typically, like I've said a few times already, is instead of having those deep frameworks that allow us to organize the information, we don't have those things, so we look for a simple answer. Well, is it good or bad? Someone will say, well, Rahu is going through their first house, and they have the Sun, Mars, Venus there, and this is going on, so is it good or bad? Or tell me what's going to happen. It's like 15 things, a question where there's like 10 or 15 different variables at least. You can't simplify it like that. That's a whole reading. What was initially in that question? There was like 10 things there. So I appreciate the question, but I also just want to let you know that these are complex issues. And what you want to understand is that if you don't work through all these details, then what winds up happening is you're going to give an unsatisfactory answer. What typically happens is astrologers can often get overwhelmed by that much stuff, and then wind up taking some shortcut and just saying a bunch of simplistic things like, well, it's in your first house, and I see it's forming a Raja, it's with exalted Saturn, so that's good, but Saturn is actually malefic, so that's kind of bad, and it's in your first house, which shows, it's helping yourself, but it's not really so good, and we just kind of fumble over all of the, just one simplistic thing to the next. And again, I'm not to make fun of anybody, it is complex, but when you have the structure underneath of you of what all of those little things mean, this is what an astrologer does. You say all of that. That's what you say. You say all of those little details. And again, you need to prioritize them. When I was starting my certification program for 2013, I talked about a whole thing called priority and sequence. This is how we learn. This is how you've learned everything. Anything you've ever really learned in your life, you learned it because it came in the right priority, or the information was prioritized correctly. First of all, it was prioritized correctly, which means you learned the first thing when you were supposed to learn that thing, right? And then the next thing when you were supposed to learn that, etc. And there was a priority, first of all. First you learn, like for instance, the astronomy behind it, and then you learn the planets, and then you learn, well, first, like the way I teach is first you learn all the Vedic principles. That's the priority first. You need to learn all that. Otherwise, there's no structure. Then you learn, after you get the priority straight, like, then you have to learn the right sequence. What comes next? Like, maybe the priorities are like 5 or 6 things, like you need to learn the Vedic principles, and you need to learn the planets and the signs, then you need to learn the houses, you need to learn about the nodes, retrograde, the astronomy, and then the nakshatras. This is the basic kind of, these are like the first 5 or 6 priorities, 7 priorities. But you don't jump, okay, let's start with nakshatras, and you don't then start with that sequence, then that's out of sequence. So what are the priorities, and then what's the sequence? And that's why you've learned anything. And so the same thing has to happen in a reading. You just start with what's the most important thing and build it up. Looks like a lot of these questions have been answered. I'm not sure if I'm on the first YouTube page, and it looks like, okay, actually there's one about dashas. Let me get this one. I'm having trouble understanding how exactly dashas start when you are born. For example, if I'm born in between a Mars dasha, how do I know how many years I have left in that dasha? And how do I know if I'm born in between or in the beginning of a planet's dasha? Okay, well, you're always born somewhat in between, even if it's just like 1 minute. The way it works is, it's based on the moon's nakshatra, based on the nakshatra of the moon. And this nakshatra of the moon is, each nakshatra is 13 degrees, 20 minutes of arc in the sky. So Ashwini is 0 Aries to 1320 Aries. Then Bharani, well, actually like 1319. Then Bharani is 1320 to 2640. And so each dasha cycle is a certain length, and then however far the moon has gone in that nakshatra, you subtract that from the mean length. So that sounds complicated, but it's not. Let's use an example. The moon is an easy one to use because it's a 10-year cycle. Okay? Let's say someone is born and the moon is in Rohini nakshatra, which is ruled by the moon. And the moon has gone the first 6 degrees and 40 seconds into Rohini. That's half of the Rohini nakshatra. Then instead of getting 10 years of Mars, they'll get 10 years of the moon, they'll get 5 years of the moon. Because the mean length of the moon is, the moon's nakshatra is 13 degrees and 20. The moon, and the moon dasha, I should say, the mean length of Rohini nakshatra is 13 degrees 20 minutes. The moon in the sky has gone halfway into that, so you subtract half of that from the dasha. And so instead of getting 10 years of Rohini, you only get 5 years, you get half of it. Let's say it's gone 3/4 of the way into Rohini, which is up to the last pada. Then 3/4 of the 10 years has expired, and the person will only get 2.5 years of the moon dasha. Let's say it's only gone 1/4 of the way into Rohini. Then the person will get 7.5 years of moon dasha because it's 1/4 minus the mean length. For instance, so that's how it works. That's how you determine it. It's really quite simple. It's formulaic in that way. So there are some other questions here. Things about sati sati. Okay, so how can you estimate how much longer will a person have left in sati sati? How do you nail down ahead of time when sati sati is beginning in a chart? Okay, sati sati. So sati sati is when the moon goes in the sign, when Saturn goes in the sign before a person's natal moon, and then it goes after it's before the person's moon in the sign that's in the 12th from the moon, then it's in the sign join the moon, and then it's in the sign after the moon, so it's said. That's said to be sati sati. And what did you say, how can you tell? You just have to know the astronomy, I believe. That was your question. How can you estimate how much longer will a person have left in sati sati? Well, you have to know the astronomy. How much longer? You have to know how the astronomy works and know where it is. So it's usually about 7.5 years or so, because that's how long it takes Saturn to go through those 3 signs. And so when do you nail down ahead of time when sati sati will begin in a chart? Well, again, you have to know the astronomy. When it enters the sign before the moon, that's considered to be sati sati. Okay? And you have to know when that is. Splendid behavior of my moon in the 4th house, yet it's a sign of Virgo. Is it moon well placed or not? Moon in the 4th has directional strength. Well placed is an objective assessment. I don't know the rest of the chart. So 4th house moon has a lot of what's called directional strength, which means you'll trust your feelings, you'll trust your intuition. At the very least, you'll trust your intuition, and it's very introspective placement, so you need to stick with your intuition. It's definitely good for meditation and things like that, helping a person do that. But again, you need other factors. It's one thing. You could say, oh, I never meditate. Well, I don't know the rest of the chart. So regardless, when a planet has directional strength like that, which is what that's called, 4th house moon, the moon is the indicator of 4th house energy, so it's in the sign where it has a lot of integrity, then you'll wind up having a strong relationship to the qualities of that that part of the planet. So the part of the planet that's supported by the 4th house, which is introspection, seeking emotional peace, trusting our intuition, will be supported. We can say that much generally. Now, again, it doesn't always mean that you're right. Again, we always have to be careful. Saying, oh, that means I'm right. It doesn't mean you're right. It just means you trust your intuition. Your intuition might be wrong. You just trust it. So the power of that is to use the power of your intuition, is to use that introspection in a beneficial way through things like meditation, introspection, rather than it might make you very isolated and be like, well, I know I'm right. It might make you even quite stubborn or something if other things are there. You'll say, well, I trust my feelings on this and that's it. And it could make a person very stubborn. Instead of getting into those kinds of things, it can also make you very connected to the heart and really support something like meditation, because that's really the best thing for the fourth house and for the moon. So that much could be known by that placement. So someone is asking a lot about their mother's chart. I'm not sure I want to talk about someone's mother. You know, I'm going to just say this, it's not like there's any intention to, violate anyone's space or anything like that on your part. The person who asked the question, Om Om Namaha. But, I have a boundary. I try to be really mindful of boundaries. I don't know if your mother would want me talking about her chart or want you talking about her chart, or so I'm careful of that. And also it's just too much. I can't do a whole reading. You're like mentioning the whole chart and asking me stuff about it. That's not really, I can't really do it here. Again, astrology doesn't work that way, and if I would give you any answer, it would be way too simplistic to justify the dignity of the situation. Astrology, it's not a parlor trick where you kind of read my fortune. And I'm not saying you think that, or I'm not trying to be disrespectful, because I know you just want to understand something about your mother or maybe help her or something like that. All that's cool. But these are deep interactions. Every one of those placements are complex. And I don't just want to flip something out. I mean, I just made a comment on one thing in one person's chart, which is moon in the fourth. And you saw how much I had to explain the different range of potentials. There's a lot of different range of possibility. When someone asks me something like they have the whole chart laid out and what do you think's going to happen, sort of, it's a whole reading, So, and if it's someone who's not present, I wouldn't do it anyway. And that means even if sometimes clients even are like, a client will get a reading and they'll present me with their mother's chart and ask me all about their mother or something, and I have to tell them, look, I don't do that. If you want to find out about your mother, maybe get her a reading or have her contact me and I'll do a reading for her, but I don't read someone's chart behind their back to someone else. Again, I don't mean it to be judgmental, but that's kind of what it is. I have to hold that boundary. I have to be responsible for what I say as an astrologer. It's, I have to hold that line of integrity or not. I mean, some people do it and they're fine with it. I'm just not. So it's maybe something to think about. Okay. The Navamsha Venus in 10th house Aries aspected by Mars from Virgo. Okay, so just look at what it is. So in this case, Mars rules the 10th house there. It's getting aspected, so it's Cancer ascendant, Venus in the 10th. So the way you would look at this, again, this is a couple things that I could say something about. We have a Cancer ascendant, it's the Navamsha. Venus rules the 4th and the 11th house. It shows why Cancers are so motivated and ambitious towards inner peace. It goes to the 10th house, which is actually about duty, responsibility, pressure. And it's aspected by the 10th house Lord from the 3rd house. And it's the 8th house aspect. So Mars-Venus placements also show a lot of passion, desire, maybe sexual passion as well. And in the 10th house, one of the things that you might say in this case, especially because it's aspected from the 3rd Lord, I wonder if the person, this is the Navamsha chart, maybe get involved with someone at work, maybe even have an affair with someone at work, or cheating, or the spouse maybe cheating on someone at work. Again, you have to see the whole thing, but these kinds of things could be possible. Venus is a cruel house lord for Cancer. It rules the 11th house, which is ambition, motivation. Maybe someone sleeping their way to the top to get ahead at work, or getting involved maybe with their boss or something. I don't know. These are a couple ideas, but again, you got to see the whole chart. But the process of working through a placement, just making a couple quick sort of predictions, you have a one-way aspect from Mars onto Venus. You have to bring in all of the house rulerships and stuff like that too. It's also a creative placement. Mars rules the 5th house. And it's aspecting the 10th lord, aspecting the 4th lord. So, in the 10th. So again, it could also, it can definitely show a sort of creativity, like a certain creative blessing in their career on some level. But again, this is the D9, so it's more related to merit, but also in relationships, Venus is the Karaka. So again, you got to see where Saturn is to know the full story in relationships. You got to know where the Moon is to know the full story of themselves. Like we just looked at harmonic charts. I didn't just look at two things. You got to look at the ruler of the chart, like where would the Moon be. You got to look at Saturn. You got to look at the full aspects on these planets, especially what's Saturn doing, its 7th lord, and all that. So, what to expect from Venus Dasha Cap Lagna if it's in ascendant aspected by other planet. I'm going to look at a few others and come back. I answered one of yours. I want to make sure to get to others because you're just asking me to kind of think like that, which I don't mind doing it to set a point, but I want to see what other questions are here. Helps you discern how to read D110 as a dynamic response to a person's life experience and age. D1 does not change, but a person really changes over time. How to see evolution. I think I kind of did some of that at the beginning of this. And so, you just want to keep in mind general things that we know about age. You said D1 does not change, but a person really changes over time. How to see evolution. Here's the thing. Read the dashas. Just read the dashas and understand what age of life they're in. Also understand the age of maturity of the planets. They all have an age of maturity. And the you really just want to read the dashas. I really pay more attention to that and understand that if a person is old, they've lived a little more, and trace the dashas back. See what dasha they had when they were a child. You can do it that way, but I wouldn't complicate it much more than that. I wouldn't complicate it much more than, like there's a whole way where someone might say that, well, since they're old, since they're older, you should... Well, actually, here's what I'm thinking, is you often hear these things like, well, as someone ages, they become their Navamsha more, and all of these things. I wouldn't say anything like that. You hear this talked about. I don't know where that's written, but I don't see that. You just keep using the same formulas, because, how does that really work? When are they considered old? And it's all these imprecise kind of general things that, if we're going to do that, then when does it happen? And why are we now not looking at the Rashi chart? Why are we now looking at the Navamsha when that's not really the natal chart? We're supposed to look at the Navamsha for all things within a context, certainly as relationships, but also as general punya, everything, and look through the Navamsha chart generally. But other than that, you can look and see, like, for instance, and I do it all the time, like people who get Saturn dasha and they're like in their 40s, let's say they just came out of Jupiter. They just came out of Jupiter dasha for 16 years. And they're going into Saturn dasha. And let's say they're like 45. And they've just started Saturn dasha, and they have all this stress because they've just been in Jupiter for 16 years, so they're used to, like, at least the feeling of Jupiter, that feeling of like hope and things like that. Saturn, regardless of what it gives, it doesn't give that feeling necessarily. Usually it gives a feeling of work and pressure, and it can give us that kind of fear of death, even if it's powerful. That's just the nature of the planet. That's just what it feels like. But I remind someone if they're getting the dasha of Saturn and they're 45 years old, that's actually a great time to get Saturn dasha. Because they're going to get, this incredible, gift, this like 19-year dasha at an age where they have a lot of power, have a lot of energy still, a lot of drive to accomplish things. Yes, okay, it doesn't feel as good as what you were used to, but you're a big girl, you're a big boy, you can handle being a grown-up now. Now you're 45, you can grow up now, and that's all Saturn's trying to do, is make us grow up. It's a good question, because you want to also look at people that, for instance, got Saturn dasha. Saturn is really hard when you're young, when you're a child. Saturn dasha in childhood is one of the hardest, because we don't have any power. We don't have any, we don't have any power. And Saturn is really how we use our power, how we have our, how we concentrate our energy on things. And we can tend to feel just kind of a little bit beaten down, and it challenges us to like rise up and commit to something. But when we're children, we're not thinking that way. We're very emotional. And so Saturn feels very hard for a child. And when people who have had Saturn childhoods, there's a benefit, because life never feels as hard as it does after you go through the Saturn childhood. And by the way, that's the voice of experience. I had Saturn childhood. So after that, Mercury comes, and then things are, and the dashas work this way. They work this way, where one is a little severe, the next is playful, the next is hopeful, the next is, separating, and so they kind of go like that. But you want to understand that and connect the person's age with the dasha they're getting, and understand the life that they're in, like the stage of life that they're in. And by the way, the age of the maturity ages is the Sun is 22, Moon is 24, Mangal is 28, Mars, Buddha, Mercury is 32, Jupiter is 16, Shukra, Venus is 25, Shani is 36, and the nodes mature from like 45 to 48. Somewhere around that time. I've heard 45, I've heard 48. Based on my experience, I found the nodes really matured around mid-40s, but I don't remember the text. I think also says 48. And so that age of maturity is important, but you want to really look at again, you want to understand the nature of the planet. Like we said before, nothing is substitute for that. And I just read the chart, I read the dashas, and understand that people age, people have had experience. If someone is going in, Mars dasha, when they're older, that's kind of hard. First of all, they've just been through the moon, and then Mars comes and wants to like kick some butt, or let's say they've just been through Venus and then they go through the Sun. Again, it's not like they're inappropriate, but suddenly they might be feeling all this intensity, but maybe they're old. Maybe they're older and they're not ready to go out and, start something new. So that's not the only potential of those planets. You want to understand what are the higher potentials of, like the Sun and Mars. It's about, discipline and clarity and things like that. So I'm looking at few other things. Jyotish was verbally learned and memorized science. And this also is the reason they recite verbatim thousands of years later. Now we don't need to memorize stuff like that. This is why they create so many tools to memorize stuff. Do you mind if Dave values memorization rather than assimilation? Okay, a lot of comments. Will your book be in an ebook Kindle? Yes. If not, I will wait until I move to San Diego. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. Geppi, can you clarify how Mongolic works? Well, Robert, I certainly will. It'd be great if you called me by my first name, by the way. You always seem to say Geppi. Like, I don't care, but it's not really that polite. Just if you don't mind me saying. McPherson. I'll call you Robert, not McPherson. Okay? Anyway, Mongolic is the are the positions where Mars is difficult. And it says to disrupt relationships, and mainly for it's mainly said for women. And I tend to think it's overstated. I mean, it is what it is. I don't want to say overstated. Here's what I mean. It's taking one thing, it's extrapolating one thing, and making it out like this is. It's kind of like sati sati, really, and a lot of those kinds of things. It's taking one thing and extrapolating everything from it, like making too much out of it, so to speak. What I mean is, Mars in the first. I mean, some of the positions, like for instance, Mars in the 12th. The reason Mars in the 12th can be difficult for a relationship is it aspects the 7th. You'll see these kinds of things. Let's say, all right, I get it. But it doesn't, like for instance, there are other situations where Mars can be quite disruptive in relationships. For instance, Mars join the Moon. It's going to be difficult. Mars join Venus. Mars-Venus conjunction, going to be difficult. Let's say, like for instance, the houses that make someone Mongolic are 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12. Okay? So, first and second, fourth and seventh, 8 or 12. Okay, so for instance, Mars in the 10th doesn't. Mars in the 10th aspects the ascendant. Okay? That's not going to be difficult. So Mars in the 10th aspects the ascendant. There are other, even Mars in the 6th aspects the ascendant. Mars joined the Moon. It's difficult. Mars in certain signs. So that's what it is. It shows Mars blemish. Mongolic means Mars dosha or Mars blemish. I hardly ever pay attention to it, except obviously when I see someone has a strong Mars. I do this when I assess. When I look at them, when I do relationship astrology, you really need to assess masculine and feminine energy. That's the important thing, not whether it's Mongolic or you put this word to it. Just like with sati sati. Sati sati is Saturn going over the Moon, or it's before the Moon, with the Moon, and after the Moon. That's what sati sati is. Instead, we put this like scary word to it, and it's like, oh, my sati sati. Sati sati is Saturn going over the Moon. Why is that painful? Because we have a lot of emotional attachments, and the attachments that we have scare us. We're afraid of losing them, and Saturn, sati sati, is going to pressure that. It's just pressure. It's just pressuring that. If someone has a powerful Saturn, a powerful Moon, they're used to solitude, meditation, all this, sati sati can be great. I'm going through sati sati. I have Saturn just nailing my Moon right now, and I have for a while. And you know what? I've had both parents die, and I've had all these things. It's had its problems for sure. But there's also, in many ways, some of the best times in my life right now, in certain areas. It's just what it is. You just read astrology the way it is. I said before, not to come back to like a broken record, but once you learn these principles, once you learn these frameworks, you're not reacting to things like, oh, well, this is sati sati coming up. That's going to be hard. And just kind of laying this stuff on people, pathologizing this with people. I don't even mention it. I'm like, well, Saturn's about to go over your Moon, and then I assess what that is. Your Moon is the third house ruler, and it's joined this, so you can expect to feel some pressure around this thing, and but you have a powerful Saturn, so you're used to those things, so it shouldn't be so bad. And you just talk about it like it's anything else, like it's something normal, and it is something normal. Sati sati, Mongolic, these things are pathologized way too much. Way too much. There are definitely times when I talk about a difficult Mars way more than I would if they have Mongolic dosha, like Mars in a 12th or something. Way more. And even so, there are times when you're doing relationship astrology, you need to assess the integrity of the masculine and feminine energy for each person. You need to assess the man's gender integrity around masculine energy, which has to do with his masculine planets, his capacity to hold masculine energy, to feel comfortable with it, to feel confident, and to also be receptive. But mainly the man is going to bond through an emotionally satisfying experience in a relationship through his masculine side, because men bond as a matter of identity through their masculine nature. I'm not saying they're not feminine, but what I mean is that as a matter of identity, men relate more to themselves as a masculine being, just like women relate more to themselves as a matter of identity to their feminine side, hence their feminine planets, which means even if a woman's got a great career, that'll be fine, she'll enjoy the career and she'll like it, but generally, who she feels herself to be in that deepest core has more to do with her feminine side. Like, this is who I really am, my heart and my family and beauty and connection and love, just as a matter of identity. It's not judging or saying they shouldn't do anything. It's just a very simple statement that's a deep, simple truth. And so in relationship astrology, you generally have to assess these things. And so rather than getting into some silly thing like Mangalik, I'm looking at whether or not the woman has, like for instance, a woman maybe has a Aries ascendant, exalted sun in the first. At that point, who cares where Mars is? This person's going to have a really strong masculine side. It doesn't mean it's going to mess up her relationships necessarily, because she might have, like the moon in Cancer. It all might be very dynamic, but what I'm saying is that you really just want to explain things relative to what it's showing, rather than pathologize it through these sort of simplistic statements. And I know they're in the classics, but there's also a lot of conditions that reverse Mangalik. By the time you get into that, again, people look at Mangalik, but they don't look at what modifies the dosha. That's the other problem, is they'll look at those houses, but if you look in Parashara at what neutralizes Mangalik, it's almost anything. So this is why those kinds of things I just stopped looking at, to be frank with everyone. I just read the chart. I know what I'm looking at this point. I understand the parameters and the principles. And I'm really looking at the woman's connection to her feminine, and the times when the masculine is maybe too much or maybe not enough. And also the man and his connection to his masculine, and when the feminine is too much or not enough or whatever. So you bring in a living, astrology is a living practice. It's a science of actively engaging with a person's karma and then who they really are. And it's demeaning and insulting to inflict simplistic things on people. Again, I'm not trying to judge anyone's work or what any astrologers do. Most good astrologers don't really do that sort of stuff. But again, if you're a student, you need to be careful of this hyperbole around these kinds of things, this kind of unchecked sort of, oh, that's a bad thing, you got that. And unfortunately, so much of the initial feedback that I get from people, like if I've never heard of them and they've seen my work, so much of the time, on Facebook or through email or something, it'll be like, I saw your video, it was great. And when you talked about Mars, that was great because I'm Mangalik, and what do you think's going to happen? Will I ever get married? And they're just freaked out about something like that. Do you know how many people are Mangalik that are married for a long time? Don't worry about it. It doesn't mean that you can't, that it isn't an issue, but there are many other things that are issues, and there are many things that sort of bring it into harmony, and it just means that you have to have a, that you would need to be, if it's a woman who has Mangalik, that you also need to have a man in your life that holds his ground and those kinds of things. And by the way, there's a lot of other things that show this kind of energy as well, not the least of which is the Gana of the Nakshatra. I'm going to be talking about Nakshatras. I'm going to be doing a few more of these free hangouts, and the next one I'm going to talk more about the Nakshatras, but for instance, the Gana of the Nakshatra is also really important, which is the Rakshasha, the human or the Deva temperament, the Gana. It's very important. A lot of things are important in showing, for instance, relationship compatibility, and that's usually where Mangalik is used in relationship compatibility and kind of a sort of divisive approach often. Thanks, Aditi. Could you please elaborate on Rahu and Libra right now with Saturn, or for somebody with Rahu in their ascendant and their Rahu Dasha? Thank you so much. Hope you read this. Yeah, I think I just did a little bit. I think I talked about Rahu in the first, and in Libra is just about the relationship dynamic as well. Okay, Bhavin, you've asked way too many things for me to talk about. You just got your whole chart, and like I said, I just can't comment on Capricorn, Moon, Jupiter in 12th. Right now in Moon Dasha, Jupiter, Antardasha, Navamsha, Taurus, 2nd house, Mercury, Jupiter, 3rd house. It's like, you could get a reading. Actually, I'm not doing readings, but it's just too much. Moon and Jupiter both in Mula Nakshatra, difficulties in profession and relationship. Okay, so I'll just say this. Moon, Jupiter in your 12th, yeah, okay. So what you want to do is you want to look at the houses they rule. I'm not going to get into the other stuff. Capricorn Ascendant, we'll take these few things. Capricorn Ascendant, Moon, Jupiter in their 12th, and that's the dashas. Yeah, you're losing your job. Difficulties in profession and relationship. Why would that be? Well, we have, first of all, again, there's a lot of things that could also be indicated. For instance, if there's any planets in the nakshatras that these planets rule as well, Moon or Jupiter, that also brings them up. There's a lot of ways. You have to look at what the planets rule also. You're just looking at the planets in the house. Yes, it's going to show loss. Moon is the 7th lord, so of course it's going to show loss in career. Jupiter is the 3rd and 12th lord, so it's a 12th lord in the 12th. It's also the 3rd lord in the 12th. And again, we don't know any planets in Jupiter signs. We know Jupiter is. We know the Moon is, but we don't know any planets in Cancer. We don't know any planets in Moon's nakshatras like Rohini or Shravana or Hasta, nor the planets in Jupiter's nakshatras, which are Punarvasu, Vishaka, and Purvabhadra. So that's also important. Again, the harmonic charts as well. But yeah, it's loss, it's difficulty. Why it's career? Again, if we looked at the balance of your chart, we would see a lot. We would definitely see it jump out. Maybe you have the 10th lord in Jupiter's signs or Jupiter's nakshatra. Like, for instance, the 10th lord for you is Venus. Maybe it's in Jupiter's sign or nakshatra. There are other things. You have to look at the harmonic chart and see what they're doing as well. Or maybe in the Moon's sign or nakshatra as well. So there's a lot of reasons why it's the career specifically, but it's going to show a general theme of loss. But again, everything has a divine purpose, and the 12th house loss, is actually compelling surrender and letting go. And it also shows the karmas of not being attached enough, especially in relationships. You're getting the karma of your tendency to sort of check out in relationship, because you got the 7th lord in the 12th in your natal chart, which means your partner's there ready to work it out, and you're ready to kind of check out. You're ready to kind of go play video games while she wants to work it out, or something like that. I wonder if there are kids involved. If so, maybe that's because Jupiter's the kark of children. But any planet in the 12th house is going to not have a lot of charge around that thing, especially related to house lords. For Capricorn, Moon is the 7th lord, which is relationships. Relationship is a karma house, and it involves and necessitates that we're involved and engaged with the person and working through that kind of mutual desire thing. Now, you want your desires fulfilled. You got 7th lord in the 12th, especially behind closed doors and secret, maybe sexually and things like that. Fantasize about partners and others, things like that. But then when they require your work and your effort to get in there and work it out, you got it in the 12th, which is like, ugh, that's so much work. I just want to, again, go run off or check out or tune out or not stay present with the person. So again, it's not a judgment. This is just the behavior of the 7th lord and the 12th. Again, it's with Jupiter. It's with its lord. So there's power there. And the power is that, perhaps maybe you like to go off by yourself and study scripture, study spiritual teachings, be involved in those kinds of things. Could very well be the case here. Generally, 7th lord and the 12th, and the person is checked out and not wanting to handle things. In your case, maybe you're checked out and not wanting to handle things because you want to connect with something much more inspiring, much more motivating, much more uplifting than getting into some argument. I get it. I know what it's about too. We all know what it's about. So this is the nuance of how you might experience this kind of thing in your relationship. So just say that. And that's really just taking 3 or 4 principles. The houses the planets rule, the nature of the planets, the houses they're in, the dashas. You're getting the karmas of that, which means you've been doing it a long time. And people say, why all of a sudden has this happened? Nothing is all of a sudden. Nothing. The things happen suddenly. Everything is sudden once it happens. Once a change comes. But it's the karma of it's the karma ripening. It's your tendency, and now you're getting the results of that tendency. So your tendency is to do, like I said, on one level or another. Again, you got to see more in the chart to know exactly, because you got to see what's affecting Jupiter and all that stuff. But generally speaking, this is the way the thing works. 1 second, I need to take a little drink here. So Gershon, you're asking again about, I half answered your question. My concern is moon well placed in the 4th house, but if it's a sign of Virgo, is good quality. Again, I didn't half answer it. I answered it. Virgo is a, first of all, I have to see where Mercury is. You have to see the dignity. But in general, Virgo is a sign. It's ruled by Mercury. It creates, it's an internal feminine sign. I talked about it relative to what I know. I don't know the whole chart. So what I can say for sure, I said. Okay? And the rest of it, besides knowing aspects, what give a planet its wellness or weakness, the home or the sign, all of it. It's not that simple. You have to look at everything, and I don't know everything. I know that it's in the 4th and it's in Virgo. Because I don't know the rest, aspects, which, by the way, that's enough for now with your chart, I think. But, Virgo is a sign that's ruled by Mercury. It's about the details, and it's a little, it can be a little distracted at times, but it's also internal and feminine, and it's where you're trying to organize your emotional, psychological environment. You can tend to turn feelings into words very quickly. You got to watch that. So I'll say that much. You tend to mistake your feelings for your ideas about your feelings. Feelings all of a sudden become an idea. All of a sudden become an analysis. This is the problem of the moon in Virgo, because that's Virgo, to analyze things. Mercury's good there because Mercury's analytical, but the moon is trying to integrate everything, and Virgo is trying to put everything in, trying to categorize. So they're kind of in conflict a little bit. So maybe that helps with the Virgo. But again, you're going to trust that because it's in the 4th. You're going to trust that it's right. But notice that you might be trusting that it's right, and that you're right, and that what you're thinking about your feelings is right, and what you're intuiting about others' feelings is right. But is that really giving you what you want through the moon, which is to integrate and feel whole and feel in flow with love? So that's maybe the stress of moon in Virgo. So ponder that. Sam, do you teach about Vedic remedies too, i.e. gemstones? I'm not a big fan of gemstones for the most part. I used to recommend them and stuff like that. If someone really has the dharma and the karma to work with gems, they'll gravitate toward them and they can use gems. But the reason I stopped working with them is because they sort of became like I see them becoming like a sort of, Vedic Prozac or something. What gem can I have to take away the bad stuff? There is no gem to do that. My feeling is they can enhance certain types of sadhana, especially if your intention is there. The great sadhana is there's really only a few things to really do, and that's do some form of meditation, some sort of mantras, some sort of mantra work, some sort of, chanting, whatever gets you to that point. Frankly, whatever gets you to that point to where you can sit down and be quiet. I'm kind of being facetious, but I'm also being honest. That's really the point that we never get to. We got, what do I do now? What do I do now? What do I do now? Well, how about you sit there and do nothing? And really, a lot of astrology is to help you do that. If a gem can help somebody's body do that by calming their heart somehow, the gems bring karma, and I don't mean karma in a bad way, but they activate the thing. If you want it activated more, wear a gem. And maybe it's good to activate it more if it's weak and it's already messing you up because the dasha's running or something. I'm not saying I'm opposed to them, but I just don't work with them much anymore. If someone really asks me about them and they get a reading and I can see they're doing sadhana and they do mantra and other things like that and they ask me, I'll say, yeah, I could see where you could use this. And there's a gem dealer that I recommend. The other thing is, I'll just say this, and again, I'm not trying to criticize anybody. People can do what they want. I don't want to take any money for gems. There are gem dealers that work with astrologers. Very reputable and credible. It's not a judgment at all because they're my friends. I like them. But I never felt good taking money back for a gem. Not like I would push someone to get a gem because I wanted the money back, but just that whole thing, it just didn't feel clean to me. That's just me. It's kind of like what I said too about reading someone's chart who's not there. It's not like I think there's anything inherently wrong with it or that it's a corrupt motive, but we all have to check in with our conscience and do what we feel is right. And that's just what I felt was right at some point with stones, is not to really actively promote them. I talk about mantras a lot. And I don't necessarily talk about Vedic mantras. I mean, I've done a couple hundred readings a year for close to 10 years now. Most of them aren't Indians. They're Westerners. They're all a whole range of people. Thousands and thousands of readings. And, it's very, people want to approach doing readings or like approaching remedies from this kind of monolithic Vedic point of view. And I have traditional, some traditional kind of like Vedic, people who use, like Indians who believe that, well, you need to do it this way because it's in the scripture and that's the only thing that you should ever do is recommend this because it's here. I have no doubt in my mind, I've checked in about this before, that if the Vedic rishis were alive today, they would fashion remedies that would serve people from all over the world. There's no way they would expect someone to chant a mantra to like Kubera, who lives in like Oklahoma and never even heard of it, somebody who likes yoga and trusts that astrology can help them and they want to get a reading. I'm not going to tell them to chant, a mantra to some, like Narasimha, the lion-faced god. It sounds strange to them. It's like something that's very ungrounded. When I talk about remedies, I find I can usually tell what they have a tendency toward. Many of them might be Christian, they might be Buddhist, they might not have a practice at all. But I still guide them towards some kind of meditation that to be interested in and solitude and introduce them to these things, and quite effectively. I think one of the great things that we can do in this modern world to make Vedic astrology useful to everyone, because Vedic astrology doesn't just belong to India. It was developed there, but like I said, I have no doubt that the Indian rishis were not just talking about India. Obviously, or else we wouldn't have got the knowledge out. So a lot of creativity comes, it's not even that hard actually. If you just connect your intuition to what's alive in the other person, they'll tell you where they're at and what they'll handle, what they can handle, and what they'll do. The biggest thing is finding something that a person will actually do that's going to help them. So a gem is really low on the list of something, first of all, that I think is going to help them very much. Many times, to get a quality gem, you've got to spend a lot of money. So, the other thing is, I'll just say this too, because I know a lot of people that have Sadgurus. I mean, I have a Sadguru, my Guru Amma, and they still often say, well, what mantra should I do for this, or what puja should I get to this planet and all. Once you get a Sadguru, the Sadguru is the guru that is the remedy. That's the remedy. The thing to understand is these remedies that are in Indian books, the ancient scriptures and whatnot, it's not like they're really powerful medicine, and they have a powerful effect. Like when you get a puja, like a, Mahaganapati Homa to, let's say remove some obstacles, these things have effect. I would never say they don't. But as far as for like a sadhana for life, or to get through, to learn about the nature of life, if you have a Sadguru, that's the great remedy right there. These remedies like, feed black rice to a black dog on a Saturday for Saturn problems. These things were developed for common folks who didn't have a Satguru, for God's sake. They didn't know any people like that. These were people who were trying to understand and try to appease these energies. If you're connected to a great Satguru, a great being, anyone even alive in this world with all the techniques and technologies we have, I'm not negating those kinds of interventions, especially if people are down with it and they're dedicated to it. That's fine, but I don't recommend that kind of stuff. Most people don't have the karmas to, like, give white rice to a nun on Friday to heal Venus problems. They're like, what? That sounds crazy. Instead, I say for Venus, it's like, your Venus is quite weak. Make sure to surround yourself with, make sure to have flowers in the room and beauty, and try to, because I already know that the person will have a problem with that. Try to make sure to listen to like classical music and uplifting, what kind of music do you like? Oh yeah, well, try to make sure to have that. Try to surround your life with beauty. It's the same thing. Now, some people might disagree with that. Okay, I get it. You disagree with it. But I find what's inspiring in the person's life, try to connect them with that. And find which planets are weak, and I'll know that they're not doing this thing. Jupiter is weak. This person doesn't have faith. They don't have hope. So what's their cultural kind of paradigm? What do they believe in? Try to connect them with the pure belief of that, because that's going to activate Jupiter energy much more than put a gem on your finger. Find out what inspires them and say, you should try, looking into that. Maybe you could, read this book on this thing, and connect them with the living energy of that thing, rather than some kind of, like I say, kind of Indian Prozac or something. And there are times when deep interventions like pujas can be very helpful, and you can see that as well. But one of the things I will say again, these remedies don't, in my opinion, remove the karma. Like, okay, now that karma is done. My karma with Jupiter is done. My problem with Saturn is done. No. That karma gets done when we work through it consciously. If you don't remember working through it consciously, the karma's not done. Now, a Satguru can shift things, and they shift things in a way where you become aware of it. It's the same process, but the Satguru and the remedy, if your heart is connected to the remedy, can help you gain understanding of it. Because that's what we're trying to do in this life. We're trying to gain understanding and wisdom. And instead, people come at remedies as a way to make the bad stuff go away so I don't have to feel it. And that ain't going to work. It just doesn't work like that. We have to feel it. The bad stuff, quote, can be minimized by a whole number of things. And it doesn't even have to be a bad thing. These acute interventions, in my opinion, like Mahaganapati Homas or Bhagavati Pujas or things like that, can help us, like avoid prison or get money when we need it. These interventions can work. But again, it's not going to take away the karma of Venus that got us in that place in the first place. We'll just need to keep getting pujas over again if we don't actually enter into that thing consciously. This is my feeling. This is how I've seen it work, and has seen it work for myself. Because don't worry, I've tried too. I've worn the gems. I've got the pujas, and they can help in a short intervention. But again, what's going to really be our salvation is that moment and those days and those times when we can just sit down and be quiet and just connect with the present moment, however we get there, because that's going to be the ultimate thing at some point, is we need to connect with what's alive in us and that living universe within us, rather than thinking that something outside, some gem or something. And now some people say, well, what about your Satguru? Isn't that something outside? Okay, I hear someone saying, or I would hear someone say that. But the truth is that the Sadguru is like the attachment that breaks the others. It's an enlightened master, someone who has become fully realized. And that's what we're trying to do. It's not that they're better than us, it's just that they're the example. And we're always looking at examples. So it's a great question. I'm glad it was asked. Okay, so Robert McPherson asked about travel overseas. Nakshatra is not really necessarily, but it really has to do. There are a few. The 12th house Lord, big, The biggest ones are 12th house Lord, ninth house Lord, for different reasons. You know, you'll see a lot of travel with ninth house because it's really where we connect with something very inspiring. Like so often a personal travel in a ninth house way, you know, to like learn something. You know, it's a great life education. Traveling is a great life education and things like that. So you'll see that kind of inspiration to travel, and it's not necessarily, you know, going to a spiritual place. You know, most people don't do that kind of stuff. It's something that you know, my students and whatnot, and people have to, when we start doing astrology readings, we kind of think, oh, spirituality. Most people don't do things for spirituality. Like, you know, they do it because they, you know, want to gain money, or they're inspired and they like it and they're hopeful and they're enjoying it. But in the process of enjoyment and adventure, which is a lot of the, you know, those uplifting qualities of the ninth house, we learn something. We learn something about ourselves. We get expanded very quickly. We find a new meaning and purpose in travel. That's a kind of ninth house travel. And then a kind of 12th house travel is literally sort of like a retreat. And it also can be a kind of, you know, the reason the 12th house is related to travel is because it's the quality of travel, let's say, especially in a foreign country, where we're out of our element. And the 12th house is literally where we're not in our power. Literally. It's why the 12th house is related to prison, to jail, to hospitals, to meditation, to loss. The 12th house is literally, in the conscious sense and in the highest sense, it's where we take the energy of the first house, which is our presence, and rather than go outward through the second house, externally, first house moving into the second house, which is speech, food, the senses, what we normally do, first house goes out into the second house. What we can do internally and in a reflective way is first house goes back into the 12th house, negating our identity through meditation and solitude, like I just spoke about. Meditation, solitude, letting go of this identity consciously is the highest quality of the 12th house. Now, we don't usually do it like that. Often, we just had an example of the 12th house. What happens is the 12th house is, because we're so external, we lose something in the 12th house. And instead of saying, okay, that's gone, now I'm going to let go of it, because eventually I have to let go of everything, we feel the pain of it because we want to have things in life. And that's natural. It's not a judgment. We want to decide what to let go of. And usually we don't let go of much. But again, what happens, and even in the example that I used earlier, someone getting the karma of the 12th house when the 12th Lord runs, or like planets in the 12th house, like the 7th Lord in the 12th, what's happened is the habit of letting go of that thing when attention was demanded. Say the 7th Lord and the 12th, usually the person, when the relationship demands their presence and demands their attention and demands their accountability, they want to go, oh no, I'm going to go over here now. So they let go of it. Again, we tend to feel like it was taken from us. We are letting go of it all the time. We're letting go of it, then we get the karma of the letting go when the dasha runs. But then when now it feels like it's getting taken from us, when actually it's getting taken because before, when we were actively dealing with that energy, we were letting go. We weren't present to it. So first we were letting go, and then the karma of letting go actually builds up, and then it feels like taken. Why was it taken from me? Of course, there's a whole lot of reasons what the person could be letting go into. It's got the 12th Lord in the 12th, like in that example, so it could be letting go into something quite uplifting. And not wanting to, in this case, probably not wanting to deal with all that problem of the relationships, because that's the way Jupiter is. It's very elevated. Oh, it's so difficult to argue. Can't we just make it all better? But again, Jupiter has a tendency to want to rise above these things rather than deal with them. And the karma of that comes out eventually. In the case of this person that we talked about earlier with Jupiter Moon in the 12th. So the 12th house is a quality of, let's say, foreign travel, which is maybe about going to ashrams or foreign countries, and also where we're not in our element, we're not in our powerful presence. Because when we're in our country, we speak the language, we know how to get around, we're very efficient and functional through the first house. In a foreign country, we're not. We don't know where we're going, we're a foreigner, we're an outsider, we're like invisible. Again, that's another part of the 12th house, like invisible. Like, I don't even exist here. Like, I don't know how to connect. I don't know. It's almost like a dream, like, oh, what's going on? That's why the 12th house is also dreams. So, those are a few things as well. Okay. Okay. A few things here. Back on my other site. If trying to help someone with Ayurvedic treatment, where should you start to look? That's a really good question. I've taught a lot of Ayurveda, actually. Entire courses on it, especially where I taught Ayurvedic astrology, pretty much, where it started with the principles, the same principles that I've talked about here. Like, this is the thing, when you start to understand these frameworks and these principles, the elements, the gunas, the genders, what the planets rule, these are universal principles that map over into yoga, into Ayurveda, into everything. And then when you take the quality of astrology, which is really just the timing, it's the timing of the cosmos. So Vicky, what I would say is that, where you would start, again, when you're learning astrology, there's a kind of intuitive place to start with needing to understand those frameworks. But most Ayurvedic Vaidyas already know this. This is why when I taught the course on Ayurveda and Vedic astrology, it was really just geared toward people who already understood, for instance, the elements, the dhatus, the Panchatanmatras, right? Each planet rules one of the dhatus. The sun is Asti, the moon is Rakta, the Mars is Maja. The Sanskrit's is not coming as quickly as it usually does. I'm working on my 6th hour here, so some of the Sanskrit's failing, but each one of the planets rule one of the dhatus. Mercury is plasma, Venus is shukra, Saturn is mamsa, is muscle. So each one of the planets also rule one of the elements, one of the tanmatras. And then you have sun and moon are Purusha and Prakriti. So you see a lot of the same, you see really the same energetics from Sankhya philosophy that inform Ayurveda in astrology, the same components. So you have a lot to begin with. Planets are also really related to different body systems and energies. It's in the scriptures. Different body parts, different organs, and things like that. But what you really do astrologically as it relates to Ayurveda is understand the timing. So for instance, any person, let's say anyone who's got a Libra ascendant right now, their Vata is high. Would have to be, because Saturn and Rahu are in their first house, and it's been that way since January. And they just had a spike in Pitta. Even though the sun is debilitated, the sun just went into Libra as well. So first of all, understanding where the planets are moving relative to a person's birth chart. And there's important houses. The first house is, of course, important because it's our physical body. First house is our physical body. The sixth house has to do with illness, stress, and that environment of problems, obstacles, things like that. So the sixth house is also a house of illness, maybe disease, at least temporarily, but also overcoming it, depending on what's happening. So the short answer is that the way that astrology can really help Ayurveda is through understanding the timing, and of course understanding how the planets are, what they're bringing when they move. You can say Jupiter, Saturn and Rahu are in the first house, but if you don't know what that brings, understanding that the planets have a quality of elements, have a quality of dosha. Jupiter is fiery and watery, so it's related to Pitta and Kapha. Saturn, Mercury have to do with Vata for sure, pressure and stress. Rahu as well. Certain other ones, have other qualities, and so coordinating where the planets are moving in the sky relative to the important planets in a person's birth chart, and then you would look at the timing of the person's life. You can see these things actually quite easily. If a person is in a Mars dasha, in a Mars cycle, you can expect that they're going to have a spike in Pitta. And the other thing to understand is that astrology does not show the Prakriti, it shows the Vikruti. It shows the derangement, not the constitution. I think it's a big mistake that I've heard many astrologers say, and again, if you said this, I'm sorry if it bothers you. Hopefully you haven't, or if you have, you're not hearing me say this, but there are Vedic astrologers who, say that you can know a person's, dosha or prakriti, their birth mix of the doshas, by the birth chart. And this is not really backed up by the data, because it says, as any Ayurvedic practitioner knows, is that constitution is established at conception, not birth. The Vedic astrology chart is a birth chart, not a conception chart. Now, there's a thing called the Nisheka Lagna, which can show you when conception was made. Again, it's a very complicated technique, and these are the kinds of things that I just don't even bother with, because you can't ever verify it. How can you verify the moment the sperm met the egg? And, and there are people who argue this stuff. Oh, no, it was then, I know. It's like, how do you know? Just like past lives. I mean, I entertain the ideas as a concept because I certainly believe they exist, but we can't verify past lives, and there's no need to. You can see what's important in every lifetime, in this lifetime, and to talk about past lives is sloppy astrology, in my opinion, because we don't know it. Whether we believe it or not is fine, but it doesn't help the person really to talk about their past lives or their future lives. They got enough to do in this lifetime. So the Nisheka Lagna is another one of those things, but Ayurveda is not really the study of the constitution. It's the study of the vitiation. And you can see what's going to vitiate the constitution based on the dashas and the transits and the planets lining up. It's not even that hard. In fact, I've taught classes to absolute beginners very effectively with an Ayurvedic practitioner as well, where we teach absolute beginners about astrology and how to look at their chart and how to use Ayurveda for like self-care. It was like 8 hours over 2 days, and it went really well. People really got it. Again, if you really know what you're doing and you know how these principles work, it's not that hard. You explain what each of the planets are, what the elements are that they bring, what quality of healing or health or whatever they bring. You connect them with the birth chart. You show them how the chart works. You show them their chart and how their chart works, basically. Like this diagonal line is your first house. It's not hard. When this planet goes in here, it's going to feel like this. Just even in a basic way. If you're running this dasha, it's going to feel like this. This is why since, 2006, you've gained a little bit of weight. You're in Jupiter dasha. Jupiter is a kapha planet. He's aspecting your moon, whatever. So he's building up some kapha. Jupiter also promotes health. He also promotes healing. So it's not necessarily unhealthy. It could be. So it's a great question. I love teaching that stuff. I love it. Maybe I'll do one of these hangouts just on health astrology because I really like doing it. I really like talking about it's very practical and useful for people rather than just, worrying about their karma. So many times astrology is not put into a useful framework where it can actually really help people. It's often information. I mean, now the information can help people, but so often people are kind of like a little low-level worry about their chart, and they're kind of looking at astrology kind of like a hungry ghost, or kind of like Lord Ganesha's mouse. Lord Ganesha has a mouse. It's kind of greedy, like chewing on his little morsels. Like, what about me? How can it help me? I'm not saying anybody here or anything like that, but I just noticed there's so much of a what we might call sort of grabby nature about astrology at times. It's really one of those things where a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, and it shouldn't be. It really shouldn't be, ever. It's nothing to fear. It's all planets of power. Anything that seems scary is an enormous opportunity for growth. You just need to change your perspective on it. At first, you need to understand it that way and understand what it is. And again, it goes back to those deep principles. I mean, if don't learn it that way, you're not taught it that way, you're not going to know it. You're just going to think, well, Saturn's one of the bad ones, man. I'm getting punished by Shani. Boy, I had that one coming. Yep. Well, I just got 17 more years. How much longer? What can I do? Help me. It's like, whew, it's hard. And I'm not making fun of anybody. I feel bad for hearing that kind of viewpoint. So something like Ayurveda, Ayurveda and yoga and other kinds of practices can really help to invite the planets in our lives in a way that's really holistic. So I've always enjoyed teaching Ayurveda and astrology. Someone said, "Hi Sam, thanks for doing this. What is the role of nakshatra lord and sublord? How much influence does sublord have on a dasha of a planet that a person is going through? I know it is complex when you include house lord." Yeah, it's complex, but I can definitely shed a little light. The dasha lord, you're saying nakshatra lord and sublord. I guess you're talking just about antar, and you're talking about dasha and antar dasha, not sublord of the nakshatra. I'm not sure, but in this case, I'm just going to say dasha and subdasha. The Mahadasha is the long cycle. And you can definitely know this. The Mahadasha is like the long cycle that we're living. The big soul lesson kind of at that time. I'm going to make a general comparison. You can generally compare it to the sun. Generally. Be careful. I'm not saying you look at the sun relative to that or anything, but generally as a principle, it's like the sun. It's like illuminating this lesson for however long the dasha is. Like if it's a moon dasha, it's going to be 10 years where this issue is like illuminated, kind of like the sun illuminates. So that's like a general theme. The secondary level, secondary level is really kind of like, it's kind of like the moon. It's kind of the feeling that we're having at that time. During that time, like the karmas are rising, the secondary dasha level is actually is really kind of a very deep, very deep principle. All of them produce results. The results are shown in a different way. They're shown by what the planets rule, through house and nakshatra and all that. And I'm not addressing that in this question because that's when it gets too complex. Okay, like what actually makes karmas ripen, house rulerships, nakshatra rulerships, and all of that. So any of these things can produce karmas, and they do produce karmas based on how many of these effects line up. But the secondary dasha lord, like if you're in moon, Jupiter, moon is the overall lesson that you're working on, of course related to the houses that it rules, the way the moon feels, what the moon's energy is, wanting to feel peace, connection, family. But then within that 10-year cycle of wanting that, Jupiter is going to be there. So whatever Jupiter rules in this, as house lord, nakshatra lord, and just the nature of Jupiter, it's going to activate like that feeling. You'll really get that feeling of, now there's hope, right? Because you just went through moon Rahu, and it didn't feel like a lot of hope then. So Jupiter comes after Rahu. So you're going to get that secondary level really has this like, okay, now this is going on. And then the third level, actually, is more related to the ascendant, I would say, which is the actions. Sometimes I often don't trace things down to the third level even. And again, I'm using these as as archetypes. Okay? You can even use Tamas, Rajas, Sattva, or Sattva is the Mahadasha, Rajas, which is emotional, is the secondary dasha, and Tamas, which is form, is the third level dasha as well. I usually don't go further than 3, and sometimes I don't even go to 3, like for Sun, Mars, or Ketu, which are fast dashas. 2 levels are usually enough, and the transits, because the transits are also very important. Nothing happens without the sanction of the transit. So usually 2 levels of dasha and transit, and you're like on the nuts. You're like, at least I am. That's how I work. 3 level, like if you get a long cycle like Saturn or Venus, you can get even a 3rd level dasha could be 1.5 years. So then you want to drill down maybe to the 3rd level. You might even go to the 4th level. So maybe that's helpful. So again, that's an archetype, that's a stereotype of the okay, so you were talking about Nakshatra Lord and Sublord, like Rohini 3rd Pada is ruled by Moon and Saturn. Okay. You know, the truth of the matter is I've not researched that so much. So there's some other research out there, but I haven't found the need. You know, like I said earlier in the day, you know, I'm sure it's a good principle. What's more important to me is knowing what produces the results and why. I haven't found. I have looked into nakshatra padas and the lords of padas. I don't really know how to use them in dashas, or even if we're supposed to. Maybe that's part of it. Again, nobody researches everything or does everything. The techniques that I use and that I find to be much more solid as it relates to nakshatras is as a primary ruler, not as a secondary pada lord. In fact, yeah. So I don't work that way. So, but what I just said though is what I do think is an effective way to approach it. Okay, so Ketu Dasha, you know, the dashas of the nodes are they're really based on, well, first of all, you know, the planets that they join, and also the houses that they're in, the signs they're in. But something that, you know, things that could be said consistently about Ketu is you know, beyond that, and that's a whole lot, but Ketu is really about finishing the past and awakening to things that maybe we've buried or hidden. They can be very strong and powerful things. You'll often see very surprising gains and benefits and power in Ketu Dasha. If someone's Ketu is so disposed, like if their rulers are powerful and, you know, they're not and they're not very disruptive, it can be very powerful. I'm in a Ketu Dasha right now, and since my Ketu started, it's been very good. My Ketu is in the 7th, and the ruler is Pisces in the 10th. So it's Jupiter in Pisces in the 10th. So because its ruler is so powerful, it's really catapulted and brought a lot of power, and it was a lot of hidden power that was there the whole time. It just wasn't used. So this is a quality of Ketu. It's not always that, though. You got to look at the ruler, and you got to look at what Ketu's joined, like everything. Again, it's a simple question. It might be a lot of things from the past that are very tangled up and uncomfortable, and it's part of that too. It's not like it's all simplistic. There's a lot of that past untangling also related to Ketu. So Ketu is about untangling the past toward a brighter future, you might say, and something where we integrate the quality of Rahu as well. So integrating the quality of Rahu with Ketu is a big part of Ketu. And anytime, the other thing about either one of the nodes, and I would say maybe not Ketu especially, but one of the things about Ketu is it is things that are somewhat hidden. And that can mean things like hidden health problems or hidden ailments, confusing things that can come up. And again, often there's surprising things come and go somewhat quickly, and maybe somewhat in a confusing way. Because Ketu is where we've buried a lot. We've hidden a lot and we've buried a lot, and you can run but you can't hide. Ketu is where it can feel very confusing, or and also feel like, God, I thought I was finished with this. I thought I was done with this lesson. Especially if it's joined a few planets, definitely. Because whenever Ketu joins, he tends to hide that thing and tends to kind of judge it and say, oh, I know all about that. I don't need to bother with that. I've been through there, done that. I don't need to think about that anymore. We feel like we really know that thing, and we kind of push it away, bury it a little bit, and then pay all this attention to Rahu often. This is the kind of general dynamism of the nodes. Again, of course, if Rahu is not joined any planets or not prominent and Ketu has joined a bunch of them, then Ketu is going to be more active. But generally, this is the way they work, a general kind of thing. Ketu is really about the past, which includes our childhood and all these things that we've been through where we have this association with it, where we're like, okay, I know all about that. I've been through that thing, and I know, and we tend to sort of bury it. But again, when the dasha runs, if it's joined a lot of planets or something, a lot of those issues wake up again. We're like, man, I thought I was finished with this. All of a sudden, I'm thrust into this, we actually really visit a lot of childhood stuff, childhood issues. In my Ketu dasha, both my parents died. I mean, actually within the last year and a half. So, and it's, it's brought up a lot, and even before that, it brought up a lot of childhood stuff. A lot of that I hadn't thought of in a long time. And actually not necessarily ideas or, anger or anything, but actually just sadness. Just remembering some really sad times, and just, I'm pretty connected to my feelings, and just I would have I don't know, not weeks, not weeks incessantly, but weeks off and on where I would be really emotional. Just the stupidest things, songs that I used to hear when I was a little kid. I'd keep listening to the song over again and just crying and crying and crying, purging a lot of pain. It's good. You can't be afraid of that stuff. So it's an interesting time. You're finishing stuff. So we need to embrace that quality of Ketu and help heal that split in the nodes. So when Ketu dasha runs, we're in that split, that extreme, and we're trying to heal it by letting go of all those things that we're okay, I kind of buried that, I handled that, I dealt with it, it's done. And then we're kind of it's sort of this sort of volcano that can erupt. And Ketu is sort of like that volcano that can erupt in our life. Okay, so there's a question about 8th house. I'm reading it now. Issue. I thought she was my friend. Betrayal. Relationships. So now my reputation. Family members that come to love her. I'm witnessing all this. I'm shocked and I'm powerless. I can't. My family, that's not an idiotic child as far as I'm concerned. I can't get hurt about my need for integrity in a relationship. I can detach from my family, but in my life I've coped with their long-term undermining / attacking me. There has to be another way. How's my 8th house influencing all of this? What's the best path towards moving toward honesty? Well, if you were here earlier, I talked about the 8th house, and someone said the 8th house was, they used the word, what was the word? I don't know. I tried to bring it into something that was less abstract than what they said, and Oh yeah, eighth house. What is this? Looking at it. Well, anyway, they use the word for the eighth house, and I wanted to bring it into something that was less abstract because really the eighth house is where we learn that we have no control. Okay, so the what you're realizing is, you had this illusion of control that you could that you could trust these people and count on them, and that they in some ways really like owed you a certain amount of integrity. I'm just being honest here. I'm not. This is, we all have this. We all expect this from people, and there's nothing wrong with expecting it from people. I expect it too. We all have it, especially when we're involved with someone, and it's built on integrity, and then you find there was lies, deception, and I'm describing what you feel. Oh yeah, the person said that it's formless, meaning the eighth house is formless, and I really wanted to describe the eighth house as there's a real form for the eighth house. I mean, it's stuff that it's a real noticeable thing. Someone, and I use the word cheating on us. We find out that people that we're being deceived and we're cheated, and people die and things end sudden, shocking. All of this stuff is to show us that we don't have control. There was an illusion of control that you had. By the way, I'm sorry to hear all this. I'm not insensitive to it. I'm sorry to hear it. It's eighth house stuff is painful. This is why we might even kill ourselves. And eighth house has a big part of that, where it's why it's right before the ninth house. Eighth house is where, this hurts so bad, I just might kill myself. And if I don't find an answer, if I don't find some hope, ninth house, I just might do it. So you got to hang in there and find meaning and find purpose. It's the terror of realizing that, my God, I thought everybody around me loved me and I could trust them, and I can't. This is a call to not depend on people for your sense of trust and for your sense of safety and for your sense of connection. And again, it's not from any kind of cynicism. It can turn into cynicism very easily if we don't have a higher philosophy about it, a higher principle. It can turn into bitterness, hostility, anger, murder. This is all eighth house stuff. And this kind of tangled up, kind of pinched up, well, you can't trust anybody anyway, so people hang on to the pain of the eighth house. It can be very hard to let go of it, because it is our deep wounds and those deep things that we're trying to protect. It comes after the seventh house. Seventh house is other people and how they extend us. They extend our heart toward them. They extend us in this role of compromise and dependency and this illusion of connection. It's not like we don't have connection to people, but we can lose the connection to ourselves. However much we've lost the connection to our own self, we can be just devastated by the eighth house. Again, that's not just a slogan. The seventh house energy, which is any kind of relationship, any kind of partner, not just with our romantic partner, but other people in any sense. That includes our family. It's other people. Other people. Now, you read different categories of other people by other houses as well. Families more second house, siblings more third. Every house has a quality of others, but the main kind of category of others is seventh. And the concept that others are our safety blanket, security blanket, reflection of who we are. This concept, which is built into everything we do, really. Well, I said earlier that it's like the deepest illusion is other people, and that illusion getting shattered is the eighth house. It can happen in ways, for instance, other people die. They're all going to die at some point. Maybe they're not going to die, but maybe it's something more harsh, like they lie to us and they kill something else. It's this death, this realization. But what does death teach us? It teaches us that life is impermanent and we never had control to begin with. And we can worry about that and blame them because you did this to me, and we can. But the fundamental connection that wasn't there was the integrity with our own heart, and established in the moksha of our own heart, which is the fourth house. The eighth house is a moksha house, just like the 12th house. So our individual personal moksha is fourth house. Like I said earlier, at some point, we're all going to need to just sit down and shut up and close our eyes on some level. I'm not trying to be facetious, but it's going to come down to that at some point. We have to learn to be comfortable with who we are as an integrated being, integrated in the heart. That's the fourth house. It's our personal moksha, our personal liberation, our personal connection to the truth, to freedom. Then that freedom in conjunction with others is the eighth house. How it fills us with restlessness. However much we're established in solitude in the fourth house, we bring that established solitude into the seventh house of our partners. And then partners or others in general. So I would say that I understand, and again, it's not a judgment that you're experiencing this, like well, you should be stronger. I'm not trying to preach. What I'm saying is that the amount of pain and fear and betrayal and is commensurate to, the attachment that you had to others for your identity and for your feeling of certainty in life. Certainty is one of our basic needs. It's one of our basic needs. We need to be certain of something. But so much of our certainty is based on others. I'm certain that I have these things. Me too, all of us. I'm certain that I have these people and they are this way and da-da. But really the only certainty that's ever going to be eternal and forever is certainty of who we truly are, beyond the karma of the world. And I don't mean the karma of the world like is a bad thing, but beyond our incarnation to perform all of these actions and to do all of these things. That's our soul trying to become liberated, to become revealed. So this is a great opportunity for revelation, and it's a great mirror of truth. And the hard thing is to not collapse into self-destructive behavior or hostility or fear or anger or all of those negative things. Obviously, you have to process them, and I'm not giving any advice because I don't know your chart or anything like that, but to just ask what's the power of the eighth house. The power of the eighth house is to face these things. And I would also say that these betrayals and these things, like I said earlier about the 12th house and the person losing things, they didn't happen overnight. And when you search yourself, you search your soul in great honesty, you'll see how you were complicit in going along with things and overlooking things that signaled a potential for betrayal. Again, I'm not blaming anybody. It's not a matter of that. There's no judgment or blame in anything astrologically. This is our karma. It couldn't be otherwise. This is a law of the universe. It couldn't be otherwise that this could happen, and you couldn't have at some point noticed, wow, I might get betrayed here, or there's a potential for betrayal, so I should either, number one, not put so much trust in this person, number two, make sure that I'm established in my own self and in my own heart more, and things like that, so that these things aren't as devastating. And again, I'm not trying to be cavalier about it. I'm sorry for your pain, always. But we can't understand the highest principle of something unless we speak honestly about it and know that these are your actions. These are your life events. We're not a victim. They don't come and victimize us because somehow, suddenly, one day, something happened. When you look in your heart, you'll see that you've been compliant, on some level, complicit in the quality of it that is so devastating, whatever it is. And in a simple way, and again, I'm not saying this because I don't really know, but in a less elegant way, someone would say, well, you're being paid back for deceiving others. You're being paid back for lying to others and cheating on others before. And I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying you cheated or lied to this person or that you've done it before or anything like that I know of or whatever. But again, we're always feeling what we need to feel. The universe doesn't make mistakes. It's one of the things that's confusing about karma is some karma is really instant, like the karma with, something like food. I use as an example. If you eat a certain amount of food, you're going to get the karma of it right away. It's going to feel a certain way in your body. If you drink too much water, you're going to get the karma of having to go to the bathroom. Whatever it is. The body's karma is very quick. We can tell the difference we can see the effects. The soul's karma it's sometimes confusing because we don't remember. Something is happening now and we're getting to experience something that's painful. And maybe in this situation, we didn't do it. Maybe we didn't do this thing to that person to justify what happened. So it's easy for us to feel that we're being cheated and that it's not fair. Karma's not fair. But maybe we don't remember a time when maybe we've forgotten the times or conveniently forgotten the times when we did something very similar to someone else. It's usually not that hard to remember. We've usually done it in this lifetime too on some level. Or, like I said, maybe we've been compliant in craving connection and this false sense of security to the truth. Maybe we've consciously, purposely overlooked the truth and knew that we were kind of in dangerous water, but said, I'm powerless to stop it. Well, we get the karma of that sort of delusion. So they're all sort of related. I remember, like for instance, when I was younger, I used to, kind of confession here, I didn't steal a lot, but I would steal cassette tapes from the mall. I had a whole bunch of cassette tapes and I would steal them. It was easy to steal them. You go and you just kind of steal them. And I had a whole bunch of cassette tapes that I had. I didn't want to buy them. I wanted to steal them. I was like 17, 18 years old. And, you're really just kind of testing it and seeing if you can get away with it, really. And what happened is I had them for a few years. I used to play in a band. Well, I played in bands for a long time. And one time we had a gig, and we had someone who helped us move equipment around. And we drove my equipment in my car, and in the back seat of my car, I had my case that had all of the tapes in it that I had stolen, right? Never paid for them. And this guy who helped, I didn't really know him very well. I kind of knew him, but I didn't know him very well. I would have never thought the guy would have stolen them from me. I was stealing from a store, but I wouldn't steal from somebody I know. Well, this guy stole them, all of them, after we dropped them off. Like 2 days later, like the next day I went to get my tapes and they were gone. I'm like, oh my God, what happened to them? And someone told me, they said, did you give Clayton a ride home? The guy's name was Clayton. And I said, yeah. And he goes, man, he'll steal from you. I bet he stole them. And he did, and he stole something else too that I didn't even realize. He had stolen something else too, and I tried to call him, never talked to him again. And this is a guy who I would pay. This guy stole stuff from me, which he could have bought for a couple $100, and he was on our crew. We would pay him a couple $100 a gig sometimes. So he kind of even shot himself in the foot stealing stuff from me. But at the time, I was like, man, I can't believe it. It's so rah. I was railing. I was 19 years old, so I didn't have the concept of karma too embedded in my brain yet. But then later I was like, you know what? I actually stole every one of those every one of those tapes. They were cassette tapes. So I kind of had it coming to me. So that's kind of the lesson on karma, I guess. And so I think I'm going to leave it there. And, I just wanted to let people know, again, if you wanted to get my book, I'm making a special deal here. If you get a $97 donation, you can get some cool stuff. In addition to what you normally get, the bonuses, you can get this course on retrograde planets, which is really cool, in addition to a bunch of other things. And if you have a $49 gift, you can get this as well, a bunch of classes. So a lot of people have taken me up on that today, and I want to really thank everyone for doing that. And I appreciated your questions and your attention. We had a few glitches earlier, but in general, I think we got through it pretty well. And I'll be doing more of these at some point. Maybe I'll do some on Ayurveda and nakshatras and things like that. You guys can let me know. Leave a message. Be in touch with me. Join my YouTube channel if you're not a subscriber. Let people know about my channel as well, if this was helpful, or about my website and stuff like that. Join my mailing list. So I like doing this stuff, and it was a lot of fun. And I think I'm going to sign off now, maybe a few minutes early. It's been a long day, 6 hours. So anyway, I appreciate you guys, and We'll talk again soon sometime.